Part 1, the setup. Well, this gives you a chance to wash that cloth since it hasn't been washed and it stinks anyway, Amanda Wilson announced, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Her perfectly manicured fingernails gripped the empty cup that had, seconds earlier, contained cranberry juice, now soaking into Dr. Eleanor Bennett's cream-colored silk blouse. Eleanor sat frozen, the cold liquid seeping through expensive fabric to her skin. Her composure remained intact despite the public humiliation, a skill honed through decades of being the only Black woman in countless boardrooms. Her twin granddaughters, Zoe and Maya, watched in horror from adjacent seats, their identical brown eyes widening with disbelief. "Grandma," Maya whispered, reaching for her grandmother's hand. Eleanor gave her granddaughter's fingers a gentle squeeze, a silent signal to remain calm. The 72-year-old CEO's face betrayed nothing as cranberry juice dripped onto her designer pants, creating a spreading stain across her lap. Amanda smirked, adjusting her Aurora Airlines name tag with deliberate slowness. "First class isn't usually where we seat the help," she added, eyes flicking dismissively over Eleanor's expensive attire. "Someone must have made a mistake with your boarding passes." The flight attendant turned away, but not before directing a conspiratorial smile toward a white businessman across the aisle, an invitation to share in her contempt. The man looked away uncomfortably, while other passengers shifted in their seats, pretending not to notice the scene unfolding in row 2 of Flight 847 to San Francisco. What this cruel flight attendant didn't know was that in less than 24 hours, this quiet, dignified woman would own the entire airline. And her very first order of business would be addressing the person who had just humiliated her in front of her family. YouTube introduction. Welcome back to Black and Resilient Stories. If you're new to here, you've just joined a community dedicated to truth, justice, and survival. Stories that show the power of dignity in the face of disrespect and the transformative impact of strategic thinking over emotional reactions. Before we dive deeper into this incredible story of justice served perfectly cold, take a second to hit that like button and subscribe. Turn on notifications so you never miss our weekly stories of resilience and triumph. We love hearing from our global community. Drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your perspective matters, and we read every comment. Now, and let's explore how one moment of cruelty on an airplane led to a complete revolution in corporate America, and how two 10-year-old girls learned the most powerful business lesson of their lives by watching their grandmother's strategic response to public humiliation. Dr. Bennett's morning. Eleanor Bennett woke at precisely 5:30 that Tuesday morning, not because she needed to, but because at 72 years old, she still felt the same electric anticipation that had driven her to build a $5.8 billion empire. Some habits never changed. Excellence required consistency, and consistency began with the dawn. The elegant penthouse apartment overlooking Chicago's lakefront was silent as Eleanor completed her morning routine. 60 minutes of meditation, 20 minutes on her treadmill, 15 minutes reviewing market reports. The precision of her schedule wasn't about rigidity, it was about control. In a world that had consistently attempted to deny her power, Eleanor had learned that time management was the first fortress of success. By 6:45, the aroma of fresh coffee filled the kitchen as Eleanor prepared breakfast for her granddaughters. Whole grain waffles with fresh berries. Brain food, she called it. Today wasn't just any Tuesday. Today required sharp minds and strategic thinking. "Grandma, why are we up so early?" 10-year-old Zoe appeared in Mickey Mouse pajamas, her sister Maya trailing behind in matching attire. Despite being fraternal twins, they had cultivated identical tastes, a private language of solidarity in a world that already treated them differently based on Maya's slightly darker complexion. "Because today," Eleanor said, placing their plates on the marble island, "is the most important business trip of my life." She poured fresh orange juice into crystal glasses. Eleanor never served children's drinks in plastic cups. Standards began early. "More important than when you bought the hospital in Detroit?" Maya asked, climbing onto her bar stool. Maya was the analytical one, always cataloging events, creating hierarchies of significance. Eleanor smiled. "Much more important. That was building something. Today is about changing something." What the girls didn't know, what almost no one knew, was that yesterday, Eleanor had finalized the sale of Bennett Medical Systems, her network of 32 hospitals across 14 states, for $5.8 billion. After 4 decades of building a healthcare empire designed specifically to serve underrepresented communities, she had transferred ownership to a nonprofit healthcare collective committed to maintaining her mission. The timing was perfect. The market was at its peak, her succession planning complete, and her new mission crystallizing with elegant precision. Today, she would board a flight to San Francisco to sign the papers that would make her the majority shareholder of Aurora Airlines, one of America's largest carriers. The $3.7 billion investment represented not just a business acquisition, but the fulfillment of a promise Eleanor had made to herself decades ago. "Finish your breakfast, girls," Eleanor said, checking her watch. "Our car arrives in 30 minutes, and today we cannot afford to be late." The Granddaughters' background, Zoe and Maya Bennett, had come into Eleanor's life through different paths, but occupied identical places in her heart. Watching them eat breakfast, Zoe meticulously cutting her waffle into precise squares while Maya created a miniature swimming pool of syrup, Eleanor felt the familiar surge of fierce protection that had defined her late-in-life journey into grandmotherhood. Zoe was her biological granddaughter, the only child of Eleanor's son Michael, who had died 4 years earlier in a car accident. Michael had been Eleanor's only child, born late in her first marriage. She'd been building her first hospital while raising him, often bringing him to construction sites where he would eventually develop his own passion for architecture. His death at 36 had nearly broken her, but Zoe's presence, those eyes so like her father's, had given Eleanor reason to rebuild her strength. Maya's story was different but equally precious. She had been the daughter of Jasmine Torres, one of Eleanor's most promising young hospital administrators. When Jasmine died suddenly of an aneurysm, 5-year-old Maya had no other family. Eleanor, already raising Zoe after Michael's death, had made a decision that shocked her board of directors, but felt inevitable to her. She legally adopted Maya, giving her the Bennett name and making her the co-heir to the Bennett legacy. "Grandma, is this a business trip or a vacation?" Maya asked, pushing her empty plate away. "Both," Eleanor replied. "You'll be missing 3 days of school, but you'll be learning lessons more valuable than anything in a classroom." The girls exchanged excited glances. At 10 years old, they'd already attended more board meetings than most business school students. Eleanor believed in experiential learning, showing rather than telling. While their classmates learned basic mathematics, Zoe and Maya understood stock valuations and depreciation schedules. "Will we have time to see the Golden Gate Bridge?" Zoe asked. The practical one, always thinking about making the most of every opportunity. "We'll make time," Eleanor promised. Business is important, but balance is essential. This was another lesson she integrated into their education. Success without joy was merely achievement, not fulfillment. As the girls ran off to dress in the outfits Eleanor had laid out the night before, practical travel clothes that still conveyed respect for the occasion, she watched them with quiet pride. Different in personality, but united in potential. They were her most important investment. Maya's quick analytical mind complemented Zoe's patient attention to detail. Together, they possessed all the qualities Eleanor had spent a lifetime developing in herself. What started as necessity, raising her granddaughters and after tragedy, had evolved into Eleanor's most meaningful purpose, preparing 2 brilliant young Black women to navigate a world that would simultaneously underestimate and scrutinize them. Today would provide a masterclass in that precise challenge. Documentation lesson. When the girls returned to the kitchen, dressed in matching navy blue dresses with white cardigans, Eleanor was already seated at the dining table, her famous leather portfolio open before her. The portfolio was legendary among hospital administrators, venture capitalists, and anyone who had ever negotiated with Eleanor Bennett. Handcrafted Italian leather, monogrammed with her initials. It contained the documentation of every significant business interaction she'd had for 45 years. "Come here, girls," Eleanor said, gesturing to the chairs beside her. "I want to show you something important before we leave." Zoe and Maya slid into their seats, immediately recognizing the seriousness in their grandmother's tone. When the portfolio appeared before a trip, vital knowledge was about to be shared. "What are you writing, Grandma?" Zoe asked, watching Eleanor's fountain pen move across the heavy cream paper with deliberate precision. "Evidence, sweetheart. In business, documentation is everything." Eleanor turned the portfolio slightly so the girls could see her meticulous notes. "I'm recording our itinerary, including confirmation numbers, contact names, and exact times for each step of our journey." But why? Maya asked. It's all in your phone too, right? Eleanor smiled. Digital records can be altered or deleted. Physical documentation, especially with timestamps and signatures, creates accountability. She tapped her pen against the page. When someone tells you they'll deliver by Thursday, having their promise in writing, with the exact date and time of that promise, changes how seriously they take that commitment. The girls watched as Eleanor continued adding details to her notes. The precision was impressive even to their young eyes. Times listed to the minute, names spelled correctly with titles included, direct quotes rather than paraphrased approximations. This is how you build an empire, Zoe asked, tracing her finger along the edge of the portfolio. This is how you protect an empire, Eleanor corrected. Success attracts both admiration and resentment. Documentation ensures that both admiration and resentment must contend with facts. Eleanor's phone chimed softly, a calendar reminder. With practiced efficiency, she closed the portfolio and secured its clasp. From her briefcase, she withdrew a stack of documents bound in a red folder marked confidential. The girls recognized this too. The final contract papers for major acquisitions always came in red folders. Today's meetings involve something I've been planning for 3 years, Eleanor explained, sliding the folder into her briefcase alongside the portfolio. I've studied every aspect of the airline industry, identified the structural weaknesses in their business model, and developed a strategy for transformation. Is that why we've been flying so much? Maya asked, connecting dots in her quick mind. You've been researching, Eleanor smiled. Every flight was a data point. Every interaction with gate agents, flight attendants, and baggage handlers was an opportunity to understand the system from the customer perspective. She closed her briefcase with a definitive click. And what I discovered was an industry desperately in need of transformation from the inside out. The doorbell rang, their car service arriving exactly on schedule. Eleanor stood, straightening her cream silk blouse and adjusting her gold necklace. Remember, girls, she said as they gathered their small carry-on bags. Today you're not just traveling to San Francisco. You're witnessing how strategic preparation creates opportunities for change. Watch everything, notice patterns, and most importantly, document what you see. The twins nodded solemnly, absorbing their grandmother's wisdom as they always did, with complete attention and absolute trust. They couldn't possibly know that today's journey would become their most important lesson in power, prejudice, and the art of strategic response. Airport microaggressions. The gleaming terminal of Chicago O'Hare International Airport hummed with morning efficiency as Eleanor led her granddaughters toward the premium check-in counter for Aurora Airlines. Their driver had delivered them precisely 2 hours before departure, Eleanor's standard practice regardless of flight, duration, or destination. Good morning, Eleanor said pleasantly to the check-in agent, a young white man whose name tag identified him as Thomas Reynolds. We have 3 first-class tickets for Flight 847 to San Francisco. Thomas glanced up, his eyes moving from Eleanor to the girls and back again, his expression shifting subtly from professional courtesy to barely concealed skepticism. And how are you related to these children? He asked, accepting Eleanor's platinum frequent flyer card with visible surprise. They're my granddaughters, Eleanor replied calmly, her tone betraying nothing. Thomas nodded, his fingers hesitating over his keyboard. Are you, traveling as their nanny today? The question hung in the air, its implication unmistakable. Eleanor's expression remained pleasant, but her right hand moved smoothly to her handbag, extracting her portfolio with practiced efficiency. I'm traveling as their grandmother and legal guardian, she said. Opening to a fresh page, could you tell me your full name and employee identification number? Please. Thomas blinked, suddenly uncertain. Thomas Reynolds, employee number 47829. Is there a problem? Not at all, Eleanor replied, writing his name, number, and the exact time, 8:53 a.m., in her portfolio. Just documenting our check-in process, a standard practice for me. The twins exchanged knowing glances, recognizing their grandmother's documentation ritual taking on a new significance. Thomas processed their tickets quickly, suddenly attentive to every detail of their itinerary. His tone shifted to exaggerated courtesy as he directed them to the security checkpoint. Have a wonderful flight, Dr. Bennett, he said, returning her ID and boarding passes with noticeably more respect than he'd shown initially. As they walked towards security, Maya whispered, "Why did he think you were our nanny, Grandma?" "Because people make assumptions based on what they expect to see," Eleanor explained quietly. "He didn't expect to see a black woman with 2 children checking into first class." At the TSA checkpoint, they encountered their second incident. The security officer, Kevin Rodriguez, examined their boarding passes with visible confusion. "First class," he questioned, looking at the girls' tickets with undisguised disbelief. "There must be some mistake." "No mistake," Eleanor confirmed pleasantly, again withdrawing her portfolio. "Could I have your name and badge number?" "Please." Rodriguez straightened immediately, suddenly conscious of his tone. "Officer Kevin Rodriguez, badge number TSA 28475. Eleanor documented the exchange with the same methodical precision, adding the time 9:12 a.m. and a brief description of his questioning. The officer waved them through with unexpected efficiency, his earlier skepticism evaporating under her systematic attention to detail. As they gathered their belongings on the other side of security, Zoe asked, "Grandma, why do you keep writing down people's names?" Eleanor guided them toward a quiet corner near their gate before answering. "What have you noticed about our interactions so far this morning?" "People keep thinking we don't belong in first class," Maya observed immediately, "and they act surprised when they see your platinum card." Zoe added. Eleanor nodded approvingly. "Exactly. And what happens when I take out my portfolio and start writing?" The girls thought for a moment before Maya's face lit up with understanding. "They get nervous and start being nicer. Documentation creates accountability." Eleanor explained, "People behave differently when they know their actions are being recorded." She tapped her portfolio meaningfully. "Sometimes the best revenge is success they never saw coming. But success requires evidence, planning, and perfect timing. Remember that, my darlings." As they approached their gate, Eleanor performed one more strategic action. She made a point of introducing herself to each member of the flight crew, noting their names and reactions in her portfolio. The gate agent, Jordan Phillips, greeted them with professional courtesy. The co-pilot, Captain Rebecca Martinez, showed genuine warmth, addressing the girls directly and offering them wingpins. But when Eleanor extended her hand to the lead flight attendant, the blonde woman's smile cooled noticeably. "Good morning," Eleanor said warmly. "I'm Dr. Eleanor Bennett, and these are my granddaughters, Zoe and Maya. We're in seats 2A, 2B, and 2C. Amanda Wilson's smile remained fixed, her eyes flicking dismissively over Eleanor's expensive attire. "Welcome aboard," she said curtly, ignoring Eleanor's extended hand. Her gaze moved past them to the white passengers in line behind them, her expression visibly brightening. "Good morning, sir. So lovely to see you again." Eleanor withdrew her hand gracefully, opening her portfolio to add, "Flight attendant Amanda Wilson." Refused handshake, noticeably different greeting compared to white passengers. 9:35 a.m. The action was smooth, practiced, almost invisible to casual observation. But the girls noticed, as they noticed everything their grandmother did. "Grandma," Zoe whispered as they moved toward the jetway, "are you grading the airplane people?" Eleanor smiled, tucking her portfolio into her handbag. "Something like that, sweetheart. Sometimes adults need report cards too." As they boarded the aircraft that would carry them toward a pivotal moment in all their lives, Eleanor felt a familiar mixture of strategic anticipation and calculated patience. Today would provide her granddaughters with something no classroom could offer: a real-world lesson in how systematic documentation transformed momentary injustice into lasting change. Part 2, the incident. The first-class cabin gleamed with polished luxury, soft leather seats, wood veneer accents, crystal glasses arranged on linen-covered trays. Aurora Airlines prided itself on premium service, a fact prominently featured in their advertising campaigns, showing exclusively white business travelers enjoying attentive care. As Eleanor guided her granddaughters to their seats, 2A by the window for Zoe, who loved watching takeoffs, 2B in the middle for Maya, who preferred easy access to her books, and 2C on the aisle for herself. Always positioned to observe the cabin, she noted the subtle reactions of other passengers. Eyebrows raised fractionally, glances exchanged, assumptions crystallizing in real time. "These are our seats," Eleanor said calmly to an older white man who was studying their boarding passes with unconcealed skepticism. First class, he questioned. Despite the evidence in his hand, all three of you, Eleanor extended her palm for the boarding passes. Yes, all three of us. Could I have your name, sir? The man blinked, returning their documents without providing his name. Just making sure everyone's in the right place, he muttered, retreating to his own seat. As they settled in, Eleanor discreetly pointed out details of their surroundings, not the luxury elements that might impress children, but the strategic aspects that informed her business assessment. Notice how the cabin is designed, she whispered. Every element communicates who they believe belongs here, from the magazines selected to the complimentary toiletries. The girls observed with newfound attention, seeing beyond the surface opulence to the subtle exclusionary signals, business magazines featuring only white executives on the covers, travel advertisements showing exclusively white families, amenity kits containing products primarily designed for white skin and hair. Look at the flight attendant, Eleanor continued with a nearly imperceptible nod toward Amanda, who was warmly greeting passengers in the first row, all white businessmen. Watch how her body language and tone change depending on who she's addressing. The differences were striking once highlighted. With white male passengers, Amanda leaned in, laughed warmly, made direct eye contact. With the elderly Hispanic woman in 1D, her interaction was briefer, her smile tight, her posture already turning away before the conversation concluded. Why is she doing that, Grandma? Zoe whispered. Because systems create patterns of behavior, Eleanor replied quietly. She's responding to signals she's been trained to recognize, some consciously, others unconsciously. As the cabin filled, Amanda made her way down the aisle, offering pre-departure beverages to each passenger. Her approach to their row was noticeably delayed, her smile stiffening as she finally addressed them. Something to drink before takeoff, she asked, her question directed at a point between them rather than making eye contact. Cranberry juice for each of us. Please, Eleanor requested pleasantly. No ice for the girls, Amanda nodded curtly, moving away without the conversational touches she'd offered other passengers. No comment about the beautiful day for flying. No question about their destination plans. Watch everything that happens today, Eleanor whispered to her granddaughters as the safety demonstration began. Watch how people treat others when they think no one is paying attention. Because by tomorrow, we're going to be the ones deciding who gets to keep their jobs and who doesn't. The twins exchanged glances, not fully understanding, but sensing that their grandmother was preparing for something significant. The aircraft pushed back from the gate, engines humming with gathering power. Eleanor checked her watch, precisely on schedule, and made a small notation in her portfolio before returning it to her handbag. As the plane accelerated down the runway, Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, mentally reviewing the acquisition documents waiting in her briefcase. By this time tomorrow, Aurora Airlines would have a new owner, a new mission, and, for certain employees, a powerful lesson in accountability. The deliberate spill 20 minutes into the flight, Amanda began the first-class beverage service. The practiced rhythm of her movements spoke of thousands of previous flights, the precise angle of the silver tray, the choreographed presentation of crystal glassware, the measured pour that never risked a spill, that is, until she reached row 2. Eleanor watched the flight attendant approach, noting the subtle shift in her expression, a tightening around the eyes, a slight downward pull at the corners of her mouth. The tells were microscopic but unmistakable to someone who had spent decades reading negotiation partners across boardroom tables. Cranberry juice, Amanda announced flatly, placing Zoe's glass on her tray table without the paper coaster she had provided to other passengers. As she extended the second glass toward Maya, her elbow suddenly jerked outward, sending Eleanor's drink directly into her lap. The cold liquid splashed across Eleanor's cream-colored silk blouse, immediately creating a vivid crimson stain that spread across the expensive fabric. Several drops spattered onto her linen slacks, while others soaked into the leather portfolio on her lap. "Oh," Amanda exclaimed, her surprise too practiced to be genuine. No immediate apology followed. No rush for napkins. Instead, she stood watching as the liquid continued to spread, a small smile playing at the edges of her mouth. "Well, this gives you a chance to wash that cloth since it hasn't been washed and it stinks in anyway," Amanda announced loudly, making sure nearby passengers could hear. First class isn't usually where we seat the help. The cabin fell silent. Even the ambient conversation 3 rows back halted abruptly as passengers registered the deliberate cruelty in Amanda's tone. Eleanor remained perfectly still, allowing the juice to continue staining her $3,200 Hermes blouse, a birthday gift from her late son. She didn't flinch, didn't protest, didn't show a flicker of the anger that any reasonable person would have expressed. Beside her, Zoe and Maya froze in identical poses of shock, their young faces struggling to process this direct attack on their beloved grandmother. Maya's hand tightened into a fist. Zoe's eyes filled with tears she refused to shed. "Grandma," Maya whispered, reaching toward her sleeve. Eleanor gave an almost imperceptible shake of her head, not now, before addressing Amanda Ball in a voice of perfect composure. "Could I have some club soda and napkins? Please," she asked, as if requesting a routine service rather than responding to a racist assault. Amanda smirked, making no move toward the galley. "We're running low on napkins. Maybe use your scarf." Her gaze flicked dismissively over Eleanor's gold silk scarf, another expensive accessory now at risk of permanent staining. From across the aisle, Jason Parker, a white businessman in his 40s, discreetly angled his phone to record the interaction. His expression reflected a mixture of discomfort and determination as he captured Amanda's continuing commentary. "Some people think buying a first-class ticket means they belong here," she said, loud enough for rows 1 through 5 to hear clearly. "But class can't be purchased, can it?" The stain on Eleanor's blouse continued to spread, the cranberry juice creating an irregular crimson pattern against the cream silk. The acidic scent rose between them as Eleanor finally reached into her handbag, extracting a package of tissues. With deliberate dignity, she began blotting the worst of the liquid, her movements unhurried and precise. "I'll need to document this incident," Eleanor stated calmly. "Could I have your full name and employee number? Please." Amanda's expression flickered briefly, uncertainty replacing smugness for just a moment before her confidence returned. "Amanda Wilson, employee number 45291. Document all you want. Customer complaints go straight to my supervisor, who happens to be my cousin." Eleanor nodded, as if this information merely confirmed something she'd already known. From her slightly damp portfolio, she extracted her fountain pen and made a note on a fresh page. The action was performed with such natural authority that several passengers leaned forward, suddenly questioning their assumptions about the dynamic unfolding before them. "I'd also like to speak with the lead purser," Eleanor continued, her tone professional rather than confrontational. "I am the lead purser on this flight," Amanda replied, her smirk returning. "So any complaints come directly to me. Convenient, isn't it?" With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Eleanor soaked in cranberry juice without offering a single napkin or word of genuine assistance. As Amanda disappeared into the galley, the Hispanic woman from 1D quietly passed Eleanor a package of wet wipes from her own purse. "Thank you," Eleanor said with genuine warmth. "I saw what happened," the woman whispered. "It wasn't right." Eleanor nodded her thanks, turning her attention to her granddaughters, who remained frozen in shock, their young faces processing this direct encounter with naked prejudice. "Are you okay, Grandma?" Zoe whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm perfectly fine," Eleanor assured her, though cranberry juice had now soaked through to her skin. "This is just fabric. It can be replaced." She leaned closer to both girls, her voice dropping to ensure only they could hear her next words. "What matters now is how we respond, not with emotion, but with strategy." The granddaughters' response. While Eleanor calmly blotted cranberry juice from her ruined blouse, Zoe's hand moved slowly toward the iPad in her backpack. Her grandmother's earlier lesson echoed in her mind, documentation is everything. With careful movements, she extracted the device and opened the Notes app, positioning it on her lap to avoid drawing Amanda's attention. "What are you doing?" Maya whispered, leaning closer to her sister. "Evidence," Zoe replied softly, mimicking her grandmother's authoritative tone from that morning. "I'm writing down exactly what happened." With surprising thoroughness for a 10-year-old, Zoe began documenting the incident flight 847 to San Francisco. June 14th, time 10:08 a.m. Flight attendant, Amanda Wilson, number 45291. Incident: deliberately spilled cranberry juice on Grandma's white silk blouse. Direct quote. This gives you a chance to wash that cloth since it hasn't been washed and it stinks anyway. Second quote, first class isn't usually where we seat the help. Witnesses man in 3A recording on phone, lady in 1D who gave grandma wet wipes, pilot who walked past during incident. Maya watched her sister's methodical documentation with growing understanding. Then, with a quick glance toward the galley to ensure Amanda wasn't watching, she carefully extracted her smartphone from her jacket pocket. With 2 taps, she activated the voice recording function, placing the phone screen down on her tray table to capture any further interactions. Eleanor observed her granddaughter's actions with a subtle nod of approval, noting how quickly they had applied her morning lesson about documentation. While continuing to blot her stained clothing, she conducted a careful assessment of the cabin, noting which passengers had witnessed the incident, which were pretending not to notice, and which, like Jason Parker across the aisle, were actively documenting what they'd seen. Amanda returned from the galley, noticing the girls' devices immediately. Electronic devices need to be in airplane mode during flight, she announced sharply, hovering over their row. They are in airplane mode, Eleanor responded calmly. The children are working on their travel journals. Amanda's eyes narrowed suspiciously. What exactly are you writing? She demanded, leaning over to look at Zoe's iPad before Eleanor could intervene. Maya spoke up with unexpected confidence. I'm completing my homework assignment on documenting workplace discrimination. You've been very educational. The comment, delivered in Maya's sweet, childish voice, landed with surprising impact. Amanda's face flushed, her posture stiffening as she registered the implied threat in the child's words. Around them, several passengers failed to suppress smiles or quiet chuckles. Devices need to be stowed during beverage service, Amanda insisted, her voice rising slightly. It's a safety regulation. Of course, Eleanor agreed pleasantly. Girls, please save your work and put your devices ignition until the service is complete. Zoe saved her detailed notes while Maya discreetly ended her audio recording, carefully ensuring it was properly stored before complying. Both girls maintained expressions of perfect innocence, though Maya couldn't resist one final comment as she tucked her phone away. I've saved everything, she stated, her eyes meeting Amanda's with unexpected intensity for a child her age. Amanda retreated toward the galley, visibly unsettled by the interaction. As soon as she was out of earshot, Eleanor leaned closer to her granddaughters. Well done, she whispered, pride evident in her voice. You've both shown excellent judgment. She was so mean to you. Grandma, Zoe whispered, her earlier tears threatening to return. Yes, she was. Eleanor agreed simply. And now we have evidence of exactly what happened, when it happened, and who witnessed it. Maya's quick mind made the connection immediately. Just like you taught us this morning with your portfolio? Eleanor nodded. Exactly. When faced with injustice, our first response isn't anger or argument, it's documentation. Evidence preserves options. From across the aisle, Jason Parker caught Eleanor's eye and discreetly held up his phone, mouthing the words, I got everything. Eleanor acknowledged his gesture with a slight nod of thanks. Grandma, Zoe asked quietly, what are you going to do about your blouse? It's ruined. Eleanor glanced down at the spreading crimson stain, now setting into the delicate silk fibers in a way that would likely prove permanent. The blouse had been a favorite, one of the last gifts Michael had given her before his death. But she maintained her composure. The blouse isn't what matters, she explained softly. What matters is how we respond to people who try to diminish us. She straightened in her seat, her dignity intact despite her stained clothing. Sometimes, Zoe, the most powerful response is to remain exactly who you are, even when others try to make you feel smaller. The girls absorbed this lesson with solemn nods, their young minds processing a masterclass in poise under pressure. In that moment, they weren't simply learning how to handle a rude flight attendant. They were learning how to navigate a world that would often attempt to put them in their place. And like their grandmother, they were discovering that documentation could transform momentary powerlessness into future leverage. Eleanor's strategic calm. As the stain set deeper into her blouse, Eleanor maintained a composed exterior that betrayed none of the calculations unfolding in her mind. 47 years of navigating corporate America as a Black woman had taught her that visible anger, however justified, almost always undermines strategic objectives. Emotional responses, while natural, transferred power to the provocateur. Eleanor would not give Amanda that satisfaction. Instead, she mentally cataloged every element of the incident, filing away details with the precision that had made her a formidable healthcare executive. The exact wording of Amanda's insults, the witnessing passengers' seat numbers, the precise timeline from initial spill to follow-up interactions. These weren't merely details. They were potential evidence in what Eleanor already recognized as a textbook case of customer discrimination. Behind her calm exterior, a memory surfaced from 47 years earlier. A much younger Eleanor, just 25 years old, boarding her first business class flight after securing funding for her initial medical clinic. The white flight attendant, who had checked her ticket 3 times, then loudly suggested she must be in the wrong section. Eleanor had been flustered then, attempting to argue her legitimacy, only to be grudgingly seated with a humiliating announcement. She says she belongs in business class, so I guess we'll let her stay. That younger Eleanor had sworn this would never happen again, not because she would avoid such situations, but because she would be prepared for them. The leather portfolio that now contained cranberry juice stains had been her first professional purchase after that incident, beginning a lifetime habit of meticulous documentation. Now, as she discreetly assessed the cabin, Eleanor noted that Jason Parker was still recording, his phone partially concealed by his in-flight magazine, but clearly capturing the aftermath. 2 rows behind, another passenger, a young Hispanic woman, appeared to be live streaming the incident. Her whispered commentary just audible. Can't believe what this flight attendant just did. Perfect. Multiple records from different perspectives. Eleanor had learned long ago that contemporaneous documentation from uninvolved third parties carried particular weight in both court proceedings and corporate disciplinary actions. Grandma, Zoe whispered, interrupting her strategic assessment. Your scarf is getting stained too. Eleanor glanced down, noticing that cranberry juice had indeed begun seeping into her gold silk scarf. Another precious item, this one a gift from Maya last Christmas, purchased with saved allowance money. It's all right, she assured her granddaughter, though she carefully removed the scarf and placed it in a plastic bag from her purse to prevent further damage. Some things can be replaced. Others, like one's dignity, must be maintained regardless of cost. In her peripheral vision, Eleanor noticed Amanda watching from the galley, clearly unsettled by her victim's composed response. The flight attendant had expected tears, complaints, or angry demands, reactions that would have allowed her to cast Eleanor as the stereotypical, difficult passenger. Instead, Eleanor's calm documentation and the girls' coordinated evidence gathering had shifted the power dynamic in ways Amanda clearly hadn't anticipated. Eleanor checked her watch, 10:23 a.m. The flight would land in San Francisco at approximately 12:15 p.m. Pacific time. Her meeting with Aurora Airlines Board of Directors was scheduled for 3:30 p.m., with acquisition papers prepared for immediate signing. The timeline was perfect. In less than 6 hours, Eleanor would transform from a passenger Amanda felt entitled to humiliate into Amanda's employer and ultimate authority over her professional future. The symmetry was so precise, it almost seemed orchestrated by fate rather than Eleanor's strategic planning. Maya, Eleanor whispered, please hand me my phone from my handbag. Maya complied immediately, passing the sleek device to her grandmother. Eleanor noted 3 missed calls from her acquisition team, no doubt last-minute details about the afternoon's transaction. She dismissed the notifications, instead opening her secure email to send a brief message to her attorney, Richard. Request immediate background check on Aurora Airlines employee Amanda Wilson, number 45291. Current position. Lead purser. Document any previous complaints or disciplinary actions. Priority level urgent. EB. She sent the message, then returned the phone to airplane mode before slipping it back into her bag. Eleanor knew from extensive due diligence that Aurora Airlines employee records would be available to her legal team as part of the acquisition process. By the time she landed, she would have a complete understanding of whether Amanda's behavior represented an isolated incident or a pattern of discrimination. Either way, documentation would determine consequences. Not emotion, not revenge, just the systematic application of accountability based on thoroughly documented evidence. Everything okay, Grandma? Maya asked, noticing her grandmother's momentary focus on her phone. Everything is proceeding exactly as it should, Eleanor assured her with a small smile. Remember what I told you this morning about timing being essential in business? Both girls nodded, recalling their grandmother's precise schedule and methodical preparations. Well, sometimes the timing of challenging moments proves surprisingly advantageous, she continued cryptically. By this time tomorrow, today's incident will have taken on an entirely different significance. The twins exchanged glances, not fully comprehending but trusting their grandmother's judgment implicitly. They had seen her navigate complex situations before, always emerging successful through some combination of preparation, strategic thinking, and impeccable timing. As the flight continued towards San Francisco, Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, not in distress over her ruined clothing, but in calm anticipation of the accountability that documentation would soon make possible. In her decades-long career, she had learned that justice rarely arrived through confrontation. It arrived through preparation, and Eleanor Bennett was nothing if not prepared. Social media spread begins. Olivia Rivera shifted in seat 4D, angling her phone to capture a clear view of Eleanor's stained blouse and Amanda's retreating figure. At 24, the travel influencer had built her brand around authentic travel experiences, accumulating 370,000 followers across platforms with her candid commentary on airline service, hotel accommodations, and tourist attractions. Today's content was departing significantly from her usual upbeat reviews. I cannot believe what I just witnessed, she whispered into her phone, live streaming to her Instagram audience. A flight attendant on Aurora Airlines just deliberately spilled cranberry juice all over this elderly black woman in first class, then refused to help clean it up and made racist comments about her clothing stinking. Comments immediately flooded the live stream. What? That's disgusting. Please tell me you're recording this. Aurora Airlines, is this how you train your staff? What's the flight attendant's name? She needs to be fired. Olivia continued her whispered commentary, carefully documenting each subsequent interaction between Amanda and Eleanor's family. The woman is staying completely calm. You guys, her granddaughters look about 10 years old and they're watching this whole thing. The flight attendant just told her that customer complaints go to her cousin, so basically, don't bother complaining. The viewer count climbed rapidly, 50,000, so 87,000, 122,000. Olivia's regular travel content rarely broke 30,000 concurrent viewers. The raw display of discrimination was drawing attention far beyond her usual audience. I'm going to keep this live stream going as long as I can, Olivia promised her viewers. This is hashtag Aurora Airlines Flight 847 from Chicago to San Francisco. The flight attendant's name tag says Amanda Wilson. I've already tagged Aurora's corporate account, and you all should too. Across social media platforms, the hashtag fire Amanda now began trending. First regionally, then nationally, viewers captured screenshots from Olivia's live stream, creating secondary posts that spread the story further. Aviation-focused accounts picked up the story, tagging industry watchdogs and regulatory agencies. In row 5, college student Brandon Lee was simultaneously uploading short clips to TikTok, where his caption, disgusting treatment of elderly black woman in first class hashtag Aurora Airlines hashtag racism, was gathering traction with a different demographic. His first video had already accumulated 78,000 views and was being shared across multiple platforms. Amanda seemed oblivious to the digital storm brewing around her actions. As she moved through the cabin continuing her service, passengers who had seen Olivia's live stream or Brandon's TikTok videos watched her with undisguised contempt. Several quietly filmed her subsequent interactions, creating a growing body of digital evidence. In the galley, junior flight attendant Melissa Chang noticed the unusual number of phones pointed toward the cabin and quietly checked social media on her personal device during a brief break. Her face paled as she discovered Aurora Airlines trending for all the wrong reasons. The company's official accounts were being flooded with angry comments, most tagging hashtag fire Amanda now or hashtag justice for first class grandma. Melissa approached Amanda cautiously. There might be a situation developing with the passengers in row 2, she began hesitantly. The entitled woman with the kids. What about her? Amanda replied dismissively. People are filming and live streaming what happened with the juice spill, Melissa explained, showing Amanda her phone screen where Olivia's live stream continued. Now with over 200,000 concurrent viewers, Amanda's expression shifted from dismissal to alarm as she registered the scale of the digital documentation unfolding. She can't do that. It's against privacy policies, she protested, though her voice lacked conviction. Multiple passengers are doing it, Melissa corrected gently, and the videos are going viral. Corporate social media is getting flooded with complaints. Amanda's complexion paled as she scrolled through comments calling for her termination. The confidence that had fueled her earlier behavior evaporated as she realized her actions were being witnessed far beyond the aircraft cabin. Meanwhile, Eleanor remained unaware of the social media firestorm erupting around the incident. Her focus remained on her granddaughters, quietly reassuring them while maintaining her dignified composure despite her stained clothing. "Look at her," Olivia whispered to her viewers, camera carefully aimed to capture Eleanor's profile without being obvious. "That woman hasn't raised her voice once. She's just sitting there with perfect dignity while this flight attendant tried to humiliate her. That's strength." The comments section exploded with support. "She is queen behavior right now. That's how you handle racism with class." Her granddaughters are watching and learning from a master. Aurora Airlines, you better make this right immediately. By the time Flight 847 began its initial descent into San Francisco, Olivia's live stream had been viewed by over 475,000 people. Brandon's TikTok videos had accumulated more than 1.2 million views collectively, and the hashtag #FireAmandaNow was trending in the top 10 nationally. What had begun as a single act of discrimination in first class had transformed into a viral movement for accountability that would be waiting at the gate when they landed. Continued harassment. Despite the mounting digital evidence, Amanda seemed determined to compound her initial cruelty with ongoing microaggressions. Whether driven by personal prejudice or a misguided attempt to assert authority, she continued to single out Eleanor's family for diminished service throughout the flight. When meal service began, Amanda deliberately skipped their row entirely. "Excuse me," Eleanor said politely as Amanda attempted to move past with their meals. "I believe we were overlooked during the lunch service." Amanda paused, her expression cool. "Oh, I assumed you weren't interested in our selection, since some passengers find our menu too sophisticated." The implication hung in the air, another suggestion that Eleanor and her granddaughters didn't belong in first class, couldn't appreciate fine dining, were somehow less than the other passengers around them. "We would very much like our lunch," Eleanor replied evenly. "The girls are quite hungry." With visible reluctance, Amanda returned to the galley, eventually delivering their meals without the warm introduction other passengers had received. No description of the chef-curated chicken option, no offer of freshly baked bread, just 3 plates placed abruptly on their tray, nearly sliding off the edges. "Enjoy it," she said flatly, already turning away. From across the aisle, Sarah Mitchell, a white woman in her 50s who had been observing the ongoing situation with increasing discomfort, finally spoke up. "Excuse me," she called to Amanda. "This service is unacceptable. Why are you treating this family differently than everyone else in first class?" Amanda turned slowly, her expression hardening. "I'm not sure what you mean, ma'am. I'm providing standard service to all passengers." "That's simply not true," Mitchell countered firmly. "I've been watching you deliberately skip their row for beverage refills, ignore their call button, and now serve their meals without the same courtesy you've shown to me and others." Amanda's professional mask slipped momentarily. "With all due respect, ma'am, perhaps you should focus on your own experience rather than monitoring mine. Some passengers have different expectations based on their usual travel accommodations." The implication was clear. Amanda was suggesting that Eleanor and her granddaughters were unaccustomed to first class, that they belonged elsewhere on the aircraft. Dr. Mitchell's eyes widened at the barely veiled prejudice. "I'd like to speak with the captain about this situation," she stated firmly. "The captain is busy flying the aircraft," Amanda replied with exaggerated patience. "Any service concerns can be addressed to me directly. As I'm the lead purser on this flight, then I'll be addressing them to your corporate office upon landing." Dr. Mitchell responded, taking out her phone and making a conspicuous note of Amanda's name badge. Throughout this exchange, Eleanor remained silent, allowing the situation to unfold naturally. She had learned through decades of navigating prejudice that sometimes the most powerful move was to create space for allies to step forward voluntarily. Dr. Mitchell's intervention represented exactly the kind of independent verification that strengthened eventual accountability measures. Maya watched the interaction with intense focus, absorbing another lesson in the complex dynamics of confronting discrimination. Her phone remained ready in her pocket, prepared to record if the situation escalated further. As Amanda moved away to serve other passengers, Dr. Mitchell leaned across the aisle toward Eleanor. "I'm so sorry you're experiencing this," she said quietly. "It's completely unacceptable." "Thank you for speaking up," Eleanor replied with genuine appreciation. "Would you be willing to share your contact information? It might be helpful to have your perspective documented." "Absolutely," Dr. Mitchell agreed immediately, writing her details on a business card. "Sarah Mitchell, Chief of Neurosurgery at Stanford. Please contact me if there's anything I can do to help address this situation." Eleanor accepted the card with a gracious nod, tucking it into her portfolio alongside her other documentation. Another professional ally with credibility and standing, perfect for eventual accountability proceedings. As lunch service concluded, Amanda's targeted behavior continued. She offered hot towels to every passenger except those in row 2. She provided chocolate truffles to surrounding rows while skipping Eleanor and her granddaughters. When Zoe's water glass remained empty, Amanda walked past their call button 3 times before Eleanor finally asked Dr. Mitchell to request water on their behalf. Each incident was minor in isolation, but damning in aggregate. A pattern of deliberate exclusion was establishing itself with undeniable clarity, all captured on multiple passengers' devices and in Eleanor's meticulous notes. The girls remained remarkably composed throughout, following their grandmother's example of dignified restraint. They ate their meals quietly, documented each incident in Zoe's increasingly detailed notes, and occasionally exchanged glances that communicated their shared understanding. This was a masterclass in strategic patience, delivered at 35,000 feet, the hidden documentation. While Amanda continued her pattern of differential treatment, seemingly unaware of the mounting evidence against her, Eleanor engaged in systematic documentation with the precision that had built her business empire. Each interaction, each overlooked service, each microaggression was recorded in her leather portfolio with exact timestamps and witness references. Her phone buzzed periodically in her handbag, likely her acquisition team finalizing details for the afternoon's transaction. Eleanor declined each call discreetly, maintaining her focus on the unfolding situation. The acquisition was already arranged to get the contracts prepared. What required her attention now was creating an unassailable record of Amanda's behavior. During a moment when Amanda was occupied in the galley, Eleanor quietly opened her portfolio to review her notes. The pages revealed her methodical approach. 10:08 a.m., Flight Attendant A. Wilson number 45291 deliberately spills cranberry juice on my Hermes blouse. States, "This gives you a chance to wash that cloth since it hasn't been washed and it stinks anyway." Refuses to provide napkins or club soda for cleaning. Witnesses J, Parker 3A, Dr. S, Mitchell 3D, O, Rivera 4D, 10:17 AMA. Wilson states, "First class isn't usually where we seat the help," deliberately loud enough for surrounding passengers to hear. Witnesses, same as above, plus junior flight attendant, M, Chang, who entered cabin during comment, 10:42 a.m. call button ignored for 14 minutes despite A. Wilson passing our row 3 times. Witnesses Dr. Mitchell 3D, who eventually flagged down A. Wilson on our behalf 11:15 a.m. lunch service. Our row deliberately skipped until I requested service. A. Wilson states, "Some passengers find our menu too sophisticated," implying we wouldn't appreciate first-class dining. Witness Dr. S. Mitchell 3D, who confronted A. Wilson about discriminatory service. 11:40 a.m. hot. Towels offered to all first-class passengers except our row. Witnesses multiple, including businessman and 1A who questioned why we were skipped. Eleanor's documentation continued for several pages, each entry precise, factual, and witness corroborated. No emotional language colored her account, just the objective recording of observable behaviors and direct quotes. This was not the documentation of someone seeking sympathy, but of someone building a case with methodical thoroughness. Beside her, Zoe had developed her own impressive system. The 10-year-old had created a simple table in her notes app time, action, quote, witnesses her entries. While less formal than her grandmother's, showed remarkable attention to detail for a child her age. Maya, meanwhile, had captured key audio recordings, carefully timing her documentation to capture Amanda's most egregious comments. Between the three of them, they had created a multi-format record that would be difficult to dismiss or minimize. Eleanor's phone buzzed again, this time displaying Richard Harmon, legal, on the screen. This call she would take, excusing herself quietly. Eleanor made her way to the lavatory where she could speak privately. "Richard?" she answered in a hushed tone once inside. "I apologize for the delayed response." "No problem, Dr. Bennett," her attorney replied. "Just confirming that the acquisition papers are ready for signing at 3:30. The Aurora board is assembled and waiting. Is everything proceeding as planned on your end?" "Yes, with an interesting development," Eleanor explained, briefly summarizing the ongoing situation with Amanda. Richard's response was immediate. "I've already received the background check results you requested. Amanda Wilson has 7 previous passenger complaints for differential treatment, all filed by passengers of color. Each was dismissed due to insufficient evidence, according to internal records." "And her relationship with management?" Eleanor inquired. "Her cousin is Thomas Wilson, VP of In-Flight Services," Richard confirmed. "He's personally closed each complaint investigation." The information aligned perfectly with Amanda's earlier confidence about complaints going nowhere. The systemic protection of discriminatory behavior was now documented as thoroughly as the behavior itself. "The acquisition proceeds as planned," Eleanor decided. "No changes to the agreement, but I'll require immediate access to personnel files and complaint records upon signing." "Understood," Richard replied. "Car will meet you at the terminal. Board is expecting you at 3:30 sharp." Eleanor ended the call and returned to her seat, where the girls waited expectantly. "Everything okay, Grandma?" Maya whispered. "Perfect," Eleanor assured her. "Our documentation project is about to become much more significant than you might imagine." As the aircraft began its descent into San Francisco, Eleanor checked that her portfolio was securely stored in her handbag. Her acquisition documents were organized in her briefcase, and her granddaughters understood the continued importance of calm observation. "Remember," she whispered to them as the landing gear deployed with a mechanical rumble. "What happens next will depend entirely on the quality of our documentation. Not on how we feel, not on what we deserve, but on what we can prove." The twins nodded solemnly, having witnessed firsthand how their grandmother's methodical approach had created a comprehensive record of Amanda's behavior, a record that would soon become evidence in proceedings neither the flight attendant nor her protective cousin could possibly anticipate. Part 3, the landing and aftermath. The wheels of Flight 847 touched down at San Francisco International Airport at precisely 12:17 p.m. Pacific Time, 2 minutes behind schedule. As the aircraft taxied toward the terminal, passengers began the familiar routine of gathering belongings and preparing for deplaning. Eleanor remained seated, her stained blouse now dry but permanently marked with the evidence of Amanda's deliberate cruelty. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to San Francisco, where the local time is 12:17 p.m. and the temperature is a pleasant 68 degrees, the captain announced. "We'd like to thank you for flying Aurora Airlines today. We know you have choices when you fly, and we appreciate you choosing us for your travel needs." The irony of the standard customer appreciation message wasn't lost on those who had witnessed Amanda's behavior. Several passengers exchanged knowing glances, while others checked their phones as soon as the aircraft doors opened and cellular service was restored. "Oh my God," whispered Olivia Rivera from row 4, scrolling through notifications. "My live stream has over 2 million views already. Hashtag Aurora Airlines and hashtag Fire Amanda Now are trending nationwide." Eleanor, unaware of the digital firestorm surrounding the incident, focused on preparing her granddaughters for a dignified exit. She helped Maya collect her books, ensured Zoe had saved her documentation notes, and discreetly checked her own appearance in a compact mirror. The cranberry stain on her blouse created a stark visual reminder of the morning's events, but Eleanor made no attempt to conceal it. The evidence would speak for itself. "Grandma, do you want to borrow my cardigan?" Zoe offered, noting her grandmother's stained clothing. "That's very thoughtful, sweetheart. But no," Eleanor replied. "There's no need to hide what happened. As first-class passengers were invited to deplane, Amanda positioned herself near the exit, maintaining her professional smile for everyone except row 2. When Eleanor and her granddaughters reached the doorway, Amanda's expression shifted to one of barely concealed satisfaction. "I hope you've enjoyed your Aurora experience," she said with obvious insincerity. "Perhaps next time you'll find accommodations more suited to your standards." Eleanor paused, meeting Amanda's gaze directly. "I'm certain things will be different the next time I fly Aurora," she replied calmly. "Good day, Ms. Wilson." As they moved through the jetway, Eleanor's phone began buzzing continuously, emails, texts, and notifications flooding in now that airplane mode was disabled. Among them was an urgent message from Richard: "Situation viral. Aurora corporate communications in crisis mode. Proceed to car as planned. Driver waiting at baggage claim." In the terminal, the impact of social media became immediately apparent. Several passengers approached Eleanor with expressions of support and offers to share their recordings of the incident. A woman recognized her from Olivia's live stream and asked to take a selfie with the dignified grandma from first class. 2 airport employees whispered and pointed, clearly identifying her from the viral videos already circulating. "What's happening?" Grandma Maya asked, noticing the unusual attention. "It appears Mrs. Wilson's behavior has attracted more witnesses than just those on our flight," Eleanor explained, guiding the girls toward baggage claim. Meanwhile, Amanda exited the aircraft into an unexpected reception. Her supervisor, alerted to the viral situation by corporate headquarters, waited at the gate with a grim expression. "Amanda, we need to talk immediately," he said, gesturing toward a private area. "What's going on?" she asked, still unaware of the full scale of the social media reaction. "You've been temporarily suspended pending investigation," he informed her quietly. "There are videos all over the internet showing your interaction with a passenger in first class. Corporate is handling crisis communications." Amanda's face paled as the supervisor showed her phone screen displaying the trending hashtag Fire Amanda Now, alongside screenshots from various videos. "That woman was being difficult," she protested weakly. "She didn't belong in first class. I was just—" "Save it for the formal investigation," her supervisor interrupted. "Right now, you need to surrender your credentials and proceed to the administrative offices. Corporate is pulling together an emergency response team." As Amanda was escorted away, Eleanor and her granddaughters reached baggage claim, where a driver in a dark suit held a sign reading, "Dr. Bennett." The man recognized Eleanor immediately, his eyes widening slightly at her stained blouse. "Dr. Bennett, your car is ready," he said professionally, taking her briefcase. "The Aurora Airlines board is assembled at headquarters awaiting your arrival. Your luggage will be delivered separately to your hotel." Eleanor checked her watch. 1:05 p.m. Perfect timing. The acquisition meeting was scheduled for 3:30, allowing her just enough time to check into their hotel, change her clothing, and review her notes before the most significant business transaction of her career. "Thank you, Batrahana," she replied, guiding her granddaughters toward the exit. "Has there been any update on the situation from this morning's flight?" "Yes, ma'am," the driver confirmed, lowering his voice. "Aurora's social media accounts are overwhelmed with comments about an incident on your flight. Corporate Communications has issued a preliminary statement promising a thorough investigation." Eleanor nodded, satisfied that events were unfolding as anticipated. As they settled into the luxury sedan, she finally checked her own phone, finding multiple missed calls from Richard and a text message reading, "Viral videos have reached board members. They're asking if incident will impact acquisition." Eleanor typed a simple reply. "Acquisition proceeds as planned. Incident provides immediate opportunity to demonstrate new leadership approach. See you at 3:30. As the car pulled away from the terminal, Zoe looked up from her iPad where she'd been reviewing her notes. "Grandma, are you going to tell the airline what happened to you?" Eleanor smiled, placing her hand gently over her granddaughters. "I'm going to do something much more effective than telling them," she replied. "I'm going to show them precisely why their corporate culture needs transformation, and then I'm going to transform it." The twins exchanged puzzled glances, still not understanding the full scope of their grandmother's plans. But they had observed enough throughout the morning to know that whatever Eleanor Bennett had set in motion, it was proceeding exactly according to schedule. The acquisition meeting, The gleaming glass headquarters of Aurora Airlines dominated a prime corner of San Francisco's financial district, its 40-story facade emblazoned with the company's signature silver wingspan logo. At precisely 3:15 p.m., Eleanor's car pulled up to the private executive entrance, where Richard Harmon waited with a leather portfolio matching Eleanor's own. Dr. Bennett, he greeted her formally, conscious of the corporate environment in them. The board is assembled in the executive conference room. Legal teams have completed final review of all documentation. Everything is ready for signing. Eleanor nodded, her composure perfect despite the eventful morning. She had changed into a fresh outfit at the hotel, a navy blue Armani suit with a silk shell in Aurora Airlines' signature silver color. The symbolism was subtle but deliberate, a signal of her imminent leadership of the company whose colors she now wore. "And my granddaughters?" she inquired, as Zoe and Maya stepped from the car, looking freshly polished in matching dresses their grandmother had packed specifically for this occasion. "Arrangements have been made as requested," Richard confirmed. "They'll join you for the initial introduction and announcement. Then Ms. Peterson from my office will escort them to the observation room during the technical discussions." As they entered the building's imposing lobby, Eleanor noted the nervous energy of the staff. Employees whispered as she passed, several openly staring at her and the girls. News of the viral incident had clearly penetrated corporate headquarters, though no one appeared to have connected it to today's major acquisition meeting. The executive elevator whisked them directly to the 40th floor boardroom, where Aurora's leadership awaited what they believed was simply the formalization of their negotiated acquisition. CEO Richard Blackwell stood as they entered, extending his hand with practiced corporate warmth. "Dr. Bennett, welcome to Aurora Airlines," he greeted her. "We're delighted to finalize our agreement today." Eleanor shook his hand firmly. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwell. May I introduce my granddaughters, Zoe and Maya Bennett. They're joining us for the initial announcement as part of their business education." Blackwell's smile faltered slightly. Clearly, children at an acquisition signing hadn't been expected, but he recovered quickly. "Of course. Welcome, young ladies. Future business leaders, I presume. Future airline owners, actually," Maya replied with her grandmother's precise intonation, causing several board members to chuckle at what they perceived as childish misunderstanding. Eleanor guided the girls to seats along the wall as Richard distributed acquisition documents to the dozen board members seated around the massive conference table. The mood was celebratory. Aurora had been struggling financially for several quarters, and Bennett's investment represented a desperately needed capital infusion. "Before we proceed with signing," Eleanor began, her voice carrying natural authority despite its moderate volume, "I'd like to address a situation that developed this morning on one of your flights." The board members exchanged confused glances. This wasn't on the agenda. "I'm aware there's been some social media activity regarding an incident," Blackwell acknowledged cautiously. "Our communications team is handling it. I assure you it won't affect operations." "I believe it will," Eleanor countered calmly. "As I was personally involved in the incident." A heavy silence fell over the room as comprehension dawned on their faces. VP of Communications. Sarah Jenkins gasped audibly, suddenly connecting Eleanor with the viral videos overwhelming their social platforms. "You're the woman from the flight," she began, then stopped abruptly, professional training kicking in to prevent further acknowledgement. "Yes, Mrs. Jenkins, I am," Eleanor confirmed, maintaining perfect composure. "This morning, while traveling in first class with my granddaughters, I experienced deliberate discriminatory treatment from your lead flight attendant, Amanda Wilson. She intentionally spilled cranberry juice on my clothing, made racially charged comments, and continued a pattern of differential service throughout the flight." She opened her portfolio, now containing the compiled documentation from herself and her granddaughters. "I have detailed records of the incident, including timestamps, direct quotes, and witness identifications. I understand videos of the incident are trending on multiple social platforms." The board members' expressions ranged from horrified to calculating. Thomas Wilson, VP of In-Flight Services and Amanda's cousin, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Dr. Bennett," Blackwell began carefully, "I want to personally apologize for any negative experience you had on our airline. I assure you we'll investigate thoroughly and take appropriate action." "That's precisely what I wanted to discuss before finalizing our agreement," Eleanor replied. "Because as of approximately 4:00 p.m. today, I will become the majority owner of Aurora Airlines, and my first executive action will involve addressing this situation and the corporate culture that enabled it." She gestured to Richard, who projected a slide onto the boardroom screen. Bennett Acquisition Phase 1, Cultural Transformation Initiative. The subsequent bullet points outlined a comprehensive overhaul of training protocols, complaint procedures, and accountability structures. "My experience this morning wasn't an isolated incident," Eleanor continued. "It was a symptom of systemic issues within your corporate culture, issues that my ownership will immediately begin to address." Thomas Wilson leaned forward defensively. "With all due respect, Dr. Bennett, you're basing sweeping judgments on a single unfortunate interaction. Our airline has an excellent service record." Eleanor's expression remained neutral as she turned toward him. "Mr. Wilson, according to my legal team's preliminary review of company records, your cousin Amanda has been the subject of 7 previous discrimination complaints, all dismissed under your personal authority. That suggests not an isolated incident, but a pattern of behavior protected by nepotism." Wilson's face flushed as murmurs spread around the table. The other board members distanced themselves visibly, creating psychological space between themselves and the suddenly toxic executive. "How did you access those records?" he demanded. "Those are confidential personnel files. They're part of the standard due diligence package for acquisition," Richard explained smoothly. "Dr. Bennett's team has had authorized access to all corporate records for 3 weeks, as outlined in Section 7(3) of the preliminary agreement you signed last month." Eleanor allowed the implications to settle across the room before continuing. "I am not here to exact revenge for this morning's incident. I am here to transform an airline with tremendous potential into an industry leader in both service quality and corporate culture." She gestured toward her granddaughters, who sat watching the proceedings with remarkable poise for 10-year-olds. Zoe and Maya witnessed what happened this morning. They saw their grandmother publicly humiliated by your employee. But more importantly, they observed how I responded, not with emotion, but with documentation, not with demands, but with strategy. Eleanor stood, her authority filling the room despite her modest height. "I intend to sign these acquisition papers exactly as negotiated. Aurora Airlines will become part of Bennett Holdings as planned. But I want complete clarity about my first priorities as majority owner: accountability, transformation, and the creation of a corporate culture where incidents like this morning's become unthinkable rather than viral." For several moments, the boardroom remained silent as the executives processed the extraordinary situation. Then Richard Blackwell, recognizing the inevitable, stood and extended his hand once more. "Dr. Eleanor Bennett, on behalf of Aurora Airlines' board of directors, I welcome your leadership and vision," he stated formally. "We look forward to the transformation you've outlined." One by one, the board members nodded their agreement, some enthusiastically, others with clear reservation. Thomas Wilson alone remained rigid, his future clearly in jeopardy. As signing began, with each executive adding their signature to the acquisition documents, Eleanor's phone vibrated with a text from her operations team. "Hey, Wilson summoned to headquarters by HR, arriving approximately 3:45 p.m. for disciplinary hearing." Perfect timing. As Eleanor had learned through decades of strategic business leadership, true power wasn't demonstrated through emotional reactions to injustice. True power was created through methodical documentation, strategic timing, and the patience to allow accountability to unfold with maximum impact. By 4:03 p.m., Aurora Airlines officially became part of Bennett Holdings, with Dr. Eleanor Bennett as majority owner and newly appointed chairwoman of the board. Her first executive order, signed immediately following the acquisition papers, established the Service Equality Initiative, with her granddaughters' names prominently featured in its title, the Zoe and Maya Bennett Protocol for Dignity in Customer Experience. The transformation had officially begun. Amanda Wilson paced the small waiting area outside Aurora Airlines' Human Resource Department, her universe collapsing with each passing minute. The crisp uniform that had given her such authority that morning now felt like a costume. Her wings pin a prop in a performance that had spectacularly backfired. "This is ridiculous," she muttered to herself, checking her phone for the 20th time in 5 minutes. The screen displayed dozens of missed calls and messages from colleagues who had seen the viral videos. Several included links to news outlets now covering the story with headlines like, Aurora Airlines flight attendants' racist treatment sparks outrage, and discrimination at 30,000 feet, Aurora Airlines under fire. She had been waiting for nearly 40 minutes. The suspension notice had been delivered immediately upon landing, followed by instructions to report to corporate headquarters for an emergency disciplinary hearing. Initially, Amanda had felt confident. Her cousin Thomas had protected her through previous complaints, dismissing them as misunderstandings or passenger exaggerations. But something felt different this time. The HR assistant who had escorted her to the waiting area had been coldly professional rather than sympathetic. The employees passing through the corridor avoided eye contact. Even the security guard positioned nearby seemed to be watching her with unusual attention. Ms. Wilson, Janet Morris, VP of Operations, appeared at the door. Her expression was unreadable as she gestured Amanda inside. "We're ready for you now." Amanda straightened her uniform jacket, summoning what remained of her confidence. "Janet, this whole thing is being blown out of proportion," she began as they walked. "That passenger was—" "Save it for the hearing," Janet interrupted curtly. "This situation has escalated beyond anything you can imagine." They approached the executive conference room, a venue typically reserved for board-level meetings, not flight attendant disciplinary actions. Amanda's stomach tightened as Janet opened the door, revealing a scene that immediately shattered her remaining confidence. The room was filled with executives in dark suits, their expressions uniformly grave. Legal counsel lined one wall, tablets open to what appeared to be company policies. A recording secretary sat prepared to document the proceedings. But what froze Amanda in place was the figure at the head of the table, the woman from first class, now dressed in an impeccable navy suit, her stained blouse replaced but her dignity intact. Beside her sat the two girls, their expressions solemn but not vindictive as they regarded the flight attendant who had humiliated their grandmother hours earlier. "Ms. Wilson, please take a seat," Janet directed, gesturing to a solitary chair positioned to face the assembled executives. Amanda moved forward on suddenly unsteady legs, her mind racing to process what was happening. Why was the passenger from this morning sitting at the head of the executive table? Why were her granddaughters present at what should have been a confidential personnel matter? Amanda Wilson, Richard Blackwell began formally. "This disciplinary hearing has been convened to address serious allegations of discriminatory behavior and professional misconduct on Flight 847 this morning." Amanda nodded, her throat too dry for speech. She glanced toward the corner where her cousin Thomas typically sat during executive meetings, finding his chair conspicuously empty. "Before we proceed," Blackwell continued, "I need to inform you of a significant corporate development that occurred approximately 30 minutes ago. Aurora Airlines has been acquired by Bennett Holdings, with Dr. Eleanor Bennett becoming majority owner and chairwoman of the board, effective immediately." He gestured toward Eleanor, whose composed expression revealed nothing of the morning's confrontation. "Dr. Bennett will be leading this hearing in her capacity as the new owner of Aurora Airlines." The blood drained from Amanda's face so rapidly she had to grip the table edge for support. The passenger she had deliberately humiliated, the woman whose clothing she had ruined, whose dignity she had attempted to strip away, was now her employer. Not just her employer, but the owner of the entire airline. This is a conflict of interest," Amanda stammered, her voice barely audible. "She can't be objective about a personal incident." "On the contrary," Eleanor replied, speaking for the first time. Her voice was as composed as it had been on the aircraft, betraying none of the power shift that had occurred. "My personal experience provides direct evidence of the customer service culture within Aurora Airlines. Evidence that has been corroborated by multiple witnesses, video recordings, and your own prior disciplinary record." Eleanor opened the leather portfolio that Amanda recognized from the flight, now containing additional documentation. "Miss Wilson, this morning on Flight 847, you deliberately spilled cranberry juice on my clothing, made racially charged comments regarding my hygiene and belonging in first class, and proceeded to deliver systematically inferior service to my family throughout the flight. Is this assessment accurate?" Amanda's defensive instincts kicked in. "I accidentally spilled the juice. The rest is subjective interpretation." Eleanor raised her hand slightly, silencing the excuse. "Ms. Wilson, there are currently 17 separate videos of the incident circulating online, viewed collectively over 12 million times. The deliberate nature of your actions is evident in each recording. She turned to Janet, who activated a large screen on the wall. Video footage from multiple passenger perspectives played in sequence, capturing Amanda's contemptuous expression as she spilled the juice, her clear statement about Eleanor's clothing stinking, and her subsequent pattern of differential treatment. Furthermore, Eleanor continued as the videos played, our legal team has identified 7 previous complaints against you for similar discriminatory behavior toward passengers of color. All were dismissed without proper investigation by VP Thomas Wilson, your cousin, who has been placed on administrative leave pending review of his oversight failures. Amanda's last hope of protection evaporated. Without Thomas to intervene, she was fully exposed to the consequences of her actions now being witnessed by Aurora's entire executive leadership team. What happens now, she asked, her voice small in the large conference room. Eleanor closed her portfolio deliberately. As of this moment, your employment with Aurora Airlines is terminated, effective immediately. You will surrender your credentials before leaving the building and will receive formal termination documentation by certified mail. The pronouncement, delivered without anger or satisfaction, simply stated the inevitable outcome of Amanda's own choices. The clinical nature of the dismissal, consequences flowing naturally from actions, somehow made it more devastating than an emotional termination would have been. Additionally, Eleanor continued, Aurora Airlines will be issuing a public apology for your behavior, announcing your termination, and outlining comprehensive changes to prevent similar incidents in the future. Your name will be included in this announcement as part of our commitment to transparency and accountability. Amanda flinched, understanding the professional implications. Her airline career was over, not just at Aurora, but throughout the industry once the public statement was released. Do you have any questions about the termination process? Eleanor asked, her tone professional rather than punitive. Amanda shook her head, unable to formulate words as the full impact of her morning's choices crashed down upon her. Then please surrender your credentials to Miss Morris, Eleanor concluded. Security will escort you from the building. As Amanda fumbled with her ID badge and airport access cards, Zoe watched with solemn eyes, absorbing another lesson in accountability. Maya's expression showed not satisfaction, but thoughtful observation of consequences unfolding with mathematical precision. Amanda placed her credentials on the table with trembling fingers, finally finding her voice as security approached. I didn't know, she whispered. I didn't know who you were. Eleanor regarded her steadily. The appropriate question, Ms. Wilson, isn't who I am. The appropriate question is why knowing my identity should determine how you treat me. Every passenger deserves dignity, regardless of title or position. It was perhaps the most devastating aspect of the entire proceeding. The revelation that Amanda's behavior wasn't wrong because she had targeted someone powerful, but because she had targeted anyone at all. The lesson landed with crushing weight as security guided the former flight attendant toward the door, her career ended by her own deliberate cruelty. As Amanda departed, Eleanor turned to the assembled executives. This termination represents only the beginning of our transformation process. By tomorrow morning, I expect comprehensive recommendations for systemic changes to prevent similar incidents throughout our operation. The executives nodded with new understanding of their owners' expectations. What they had just witnessed wasn't merely a personnel action, but a declaration of values that would reshape Aurora Airlines from its corporate foundation to its customer touchpoints. What Amanda Wilson never understood, even as she surrendered her wings pin at the security desk, was that Eleanor Bennett had never sought revenge. She had simply created accountability, the natural consequence of actions documented with strategic precision and addressed with professional authority. The lesson would echo throughout Aurora Airlines long after Amanda's departure. Dignity wasn't negotiable. Documentation was power, and leadership meant ensuring that values weren't just stated, but systematically enforced. The confrontation with Amanda's termination complete. Eleanor faced the assembled executive team with calm authority. The contrast was striking. Her first official action as owner delivered without theatrics or gloating. Just the methodical application of accountability based on thoroughly documented evidence. I want to be absolutely clear. Eleanor addressed the room, her voice carrying natural gravity. Ms. Wilson's termination is not the conclusion of this matter, but merely the beginning of a comprehensive transformation process. She opened her portfolio, revealing a document titled Aurora Transformation Initiative Phase 1. The executive team leaned forward, suddenly understanding that today's events had been not just a response to a single incident, but part of a carefully orchestrated strategy. For the past 3 years, Eleanor explained, I've been studying the airline industry, identifying structural weaknesses in service culture, accountability systems, and leadership models. Aurora Airlines demonstrated both the problems I've observed and the potential for meaningful transformation. She gestured to Richard, who distributed copies of the initiative document to each executive. You'll find a detailed analysis of complaint patterns across your operation, indicating systemic issues rather than isolated incidents. Ms. Wilson's behavior this morning simply provided a documented case study of these broader concerns. Thomas Martinez, Chief Operations Officer, studied the document with growing discomfort. Dr. Bennett, while I appreciate your concerns, this analysis seems to suggest our entire operation is fundamentally flawed based on a single incident. Not at all, Eleanor corrected firmly. The incident this morning was merely the visible manifestation of problems clearly documented in your own data. She turned to page 17 of the report, where complaint statistics were broken down by passenger demographics. Your records show passengers of color are 3.7 times more likely to report negative service experiences than white passengers. Complaints from black passengers are 58% less likely to receive substantive responses. The statistics, pulled from Aurora's own databases during due diligence, landed with undeniable impact. These weren't Eleanor's interpretations, but the company's own data, revealing patterns they had failed to address. Furthermore, she continued, when discriminatory incidents are reported, investigation protocols systematically favor employee accounts over passenger testimony. In cases like Miss Wilson's, family connections have created protection from accountability that undermines your service standards. The executives exchanged uncomfortable glances, several making notes as the systematic nature of the problem became increasingly apparent. What had initially seemed like an isolated PR crisis was revealing itself as a fundamental corporate governance failure. Eleanor turned to her granddaughters, who had been observing the proceedings with remarkable attentiveness for children their age. Zoe, would you please share your documentation with the board? Zoe stood, iPad in hand, her young voice steady despite the intimidating audience. When the flight attendant spilled juice on my grandmother, I started taking notes like she taught me. She displayed her detailed timeline, showing timestamps, direct quotes, and witness identifications with surprising thoroughness. I documented 17 separate incidents where Ms. Wilson treated us differently than other passengers. The executive's expressions shifted as they processed this unexpected testimony. A 10-year-old girl demonstrating more professional documentation skills than many of their own managers. And Maya, Eleanor continued, would you share your recordings? Maya stood next to her sister, producing her smartphone. I recorded Ms. Wilson's comments when she thought no one was paying attention. She played several audio clips capturing Amanda's thinly veiled contempt, her reference to people who don't belong in first class, her deliberate humiliation attempts, the combined evidence, Zoe's written documentation, Maya's audio recordings, Eleanor's professional observations, and the viral videos now circulating online, created an irrefutable case not just against Amanda, but against the systems that had enabled her behavior. What exactly are you proposing? Dr. Bennett, Richard Blackwell asked, recognizing the strategic thoroughness of Eleanor's approach. A complete transformation of Aurora's service culture. Eleanor responded without hesitation, beginning with a comprehensive review of all pending discrimination complaints conducted by an independent third party, followed by structural changes to complaint investigation protocols, removing opportunities for nepotism or bias to influence outcomes. She turned to Janet Morris. Effective immediately, all customer service staff will undergo revised training based on what I'm calling the Zoe and Maya protocol, a documentation-based accountability system that rewards consistent service delivery regardless of passenger demographics. The specificity of Eleanor's plan made clear that this wasn't a reactionary response, but a strategic initiative developed long before this morning's incident. The acquisition itself was revealed as part of a broader vision for industry transformation. You've been planning this all along, Sarah Jenkins realized aloud. The acquisition wasn't just a financial investment. Correct, Eleanor confirmed. Aurora Airlines has tremendous potential, hampered by systemic cultural issues. My investment isn't merely financial but philosophical, a belief that excellence in service can only be achieved when dignity becomes non-negotiable for every passenger. As the executives processed this paradigm shift, Eleanor's phone discreetly vibrated with an update from her communications team. Viral videos now 20M plus views across platforms. Major news outlets requesting statements. Social media sentiment 94% supportive of first-class grandma versus Aurora Airlines. The PR disaster was expanding exponentially, but Eleanor had anticipated this too. From her portfolio, she extracted a prepared press release and passed it to Sarah Jenkins. This statement acknowledges the incident, announces Ms. Ross Wilson's termination, outlines immediate corrective actions, and introduces the Transformation Initiative. Eleanor explained, it positions today's events not as a crisis, but as a catalyst for positive change. Sarah reviewed the document with professional appreciation. This is remarkably comprehensive. It addresses stakeholder concerns while establishing a forward-looking narrative. Issue it immediately. Eleanor directed. The most effective crisis management isn't defensive but transformative. We're not hiding from what happened. We're using it to demonstrate our values in action. As Sarah departed to implement the communication strategy, Eleanor turned back to the remaining executives. Tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., I'll be conducting individual assessment interviews with each member of the executive team. Your continued leadership roles will depend on your demonstrated commitment to the Transformation Initiative. The message was clear. Today's changes weren't cosmetic, but fundamental. Those unwilling to embrace the new direction would not remain part of Aurora's leadership. Dr. Bennett, Richard Blackwell said carefully, while I fully support addressing today's unfortunate incident, these changes represent a significant departure from our established operations. That's precisely the point. Mr. Blackwell, Eleanor replied with quiet authority, your established operations produced the culture that enabled this morning's incident. Transformation requires departure from established patterns. She closed her portfolio with finality. My granddaughters witnessed something this morning that no child should see. Deliberate cruelty based on assumptions about who belongs where. But they also witnessed how strategic documentation transforms momentary powerlessness into lasting change. Eleanor stood, signaling the meeting's conclusion. By this time tomorrow, Aurora Airlines will begin operating under new principles, with new accountability structures, and a renewed commitment to dignity as a non-negotiable aspect of our service culture. As the executives filed out, Zoe and Maya remained beside their grandmother, having received perhaps the most powerful business education possible. Witnessing how methodical documentation, strategic timing, and unwavering principle could transform an industry from the inside out. Grandma, Maya whispered once they were alone. Did you buy the airline because of what happened this morning? Eleanor smiled, stroking her granddaughter's cheek gently. No, sweetheart. I bought the airline so I could change how it treats everyone. What happened this morning simply gave me the perfect example of why that change is necessary. The transformation had begun, not with emotional demands or public outcry, but with documented evidence and strategic leadership. It was a lesson Eleanor's granddaughters would carry throughout their lives. The understanding that true power comes not from position, but from preparation. The granddaughters' moment with the executive team dismissed and implementation teams activated. Eleanor finally had a private moment with her granddaughters in the expansive corner office that now belonged to her as chairwoman. The girls sat on a sleek leather sofa, their young legs swinging slightly above the floor, their expressions processing the extraordinary events of the day. I have something important to ask you, Eleanor said, taking a seat between them. How are you feeling about everything that's happened today? The girls exchanged a glance, their silent communication system that Eleanor had observed since they were toddlers. I was really upset when that lady spilled juice on you, Zoe admitted, her voice small but steady. I wanted to yell at her. I wanted to spill juice on her uniform, Maya added with characteristic directness. But then I remembered what you always tell us about responding instead of reacting. Eleanor nodded approvingly. And what did you choose to do instead? We documented everything. Zoe replied, holding up her iPad. Just like you taught us. Because evidence is power. Maya completed, the lesson thoroughly absorbed. Eleanor took both their hands in hers. I'm extremely proud of how you handled yourselves today. You witnessed something difficult. Someone trying to make your grandmother feel small because of assumptions about who she was and where she belonged. But you didn't look small, Grandma, Maya observed. You looked powerful, even with juices all over your blouse. That's because true dignity can't be damaged by cranberry juice, Eleanor explained with a warm smile. What matters isn't what happens to us, but how we choose to respond. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Richard appeared with several board members who had requested a follow-up meeting about implementation timelines for the transformation initiative. Dr. Bennett, we're ready when you are, he announced. The board has some questions about prioritization of the proposed changes. Excellent, Eleanor replied. But before we continue, I'd like my granddaughters to present their documentation to the board. Their perspective is essential to understanding what happened this morning and why our response matters. Richard looked surprised but nodded agreement. The girls straightened immediately, recognizing the significance of the opportunity their grandmother was creating. As the board members reassembled, Eleanor addressed them formally. Before we discuss implementation details, I believe it's important to understand today's events through the eyes of those who experienced them directly. My granddaughters have prepared their own documentation of this morning's incident, which I'd like them to present. Zoe stood first, iPad in hand, her initial nervousness fading as she connected to her grandmother's lesson about documentation creating confidence. Good afternoon, she began with remarkable poise for a 10-year-old. My name is Zoe Bennett, and this morning I observed and documented discriminatory behavior on Aurora Airlines Flight 847. She projected her notes onto the boardroom screen, revealing a surprisingly sophisticated documentation system. I created this timeline showing each incident, including exact times, specific quotes, and witness information. The board members leaned forward, some visibly surprised by the child's methodical approach. Zoe continued with growing confidence, walking them through each documented interaction with Amanda Wilson, the initial juice spill, the derogatory comments, the subsequent pattern of differential service. I noted that other passengers in first class received hot towels, while our row was skipped, she explained, highlighting a particularly telling example. When Grandma's call button was pressed, it was ignored 3 times while other call buttons received immediate response. I documented each instance with the exact time and the flight attendant's location when she ignored us. When Zoe concluded her presentation, Maya stood beside her sister, smartphone in hand. I focused on audio documentation, she explained with her characteristic directness. While my sister recorded what happened, I recorded what was said. She played several audio clips capturing Amanda's tone and specific language choices, the dismissive, these people references, the implication that Eleanor and her granddaughters didn't belong in first class, the suggestion that they wouldn't appreciate the sophisticated meal options. I made sure to capture only what actually happened, Maya emphasized. No editorializing or exaggeration, just facts. That's what Grandma taught us about proper documentation. It has to be objective to be useful. The board members exchanged impressed glances as the girls concluded their presentation. What might have been dismissed as subjective complaints became irrefutable evidence when presented through the methodical documentation of 2 children who had simply applied the lessons their grandmother had taught them. Thank you, Zoe and Maya, Eleanor said with evident pride. Your documentation will become part of Aurora Airlines' new training program, demonstrating how objective evidence creates accountability. Board member Catherine Rodriguez leaned forward, addressing the girls directly. I'm genuinely impressed by your professionalism. Most adults wouldn't have documented the situation with such clarity and objectivity. Our grandmother taught us that documentation is everything, Maya replied matter-of-factly. She says you can't change what you can't prove, and feelings don't fix problems. Evidence does, Zoe added, quoting another of Eleanor's frequent teachings. As the girls returned to their seats, the board's perspective visibly shifted. What had begun as a crisis management meeting transformed into a strategic reimagining of the company's future. The twins' presentation had humanized the situation without emotionalizing it, showing the impact of discriminatory behavior through the eyes of children while maintaining professional documentation standards that many executives might struggle to match. Richard Blackwell cleared his throat. Dr. Bennett, I think I speak for the entire board when I say your granddaughters have demonstrated exactly why our transformation initiative isn't just important, but essential. If two 10-year-old girls can document injustice with such precision, our own systems should certainly be capable of similar objectivity. Eleanor nodded her agreement. Zoe and Maya have shown us something crucial today, that accountability doesn't require complex systems, just committed observation and thorough documentation. Our transformation initiative will apply that principle throughout Aurora's operations, creating a culture where evidence drives improvement. As the meeting transitioned to implementation details, the girls remained present, observing the corporate machinery their grandmother now controlled with the same careful attention they had applied to documenting the morning's incident. They were witnessing not just how business operated, but how strategic leadership transformed organizations from within, a lesson more valuable than any classroom could provide. When they finally left the boardroom, Maya tugged gently at her grandmother's sleeve. "Grandma," she whispered, "are we the future of this airline now?" Eleanor smiled, embracing both girls warmly. "You're much more important than that, my darlings. You're the conscience of this airline, the standard by which we'll measure whether we're truly living our values." It was perhaps the most powerful lesson of the day. That transformation began not with corporate initiatives, but with individual integrity, documented evidence, and the courage to hold systems accountable. Part 4, the transformation. At precisely 8 o'clock a.m. the following morning, Eleanor convened Aurora Airlines executive team in the main boardroom. The atmosphere was markedly different from the previous day's acquisition meeting. Gone was the celebratory mood, replaced by focused attentiveness as executives recognized the scope of transformation their new owner envisioned. "Good morning," Eleanor began, impeccably dressed in a charcoal gray suit with Aurora's signature silver accents. "Before our press conference at 9 o'clock, I want to outline specific actions being implemented effective immediately." She nodded to Richard, who distributed comprehensive packets to each executive. The cover page bore an elegant but determined title, Aurora Transformation Initiative Implementation Phase 1. You'll find detailed protocols addressing 5 key areas. Eleanor continued without preamble. First, our new complaint investigation system, which removes departmental influence from the process. Second, mandatory documentation requirements for all customer interactions. Third, we showed revised training protocols focused on service consistency regardless of passenger demographics. Fourth, accountability metrics that will be tied directly to compensation at all levels. And fifth, our corporate governance restructuring that establishes an independent ethics board with termination authority. The executives reviewed the materials with expressions ranging from impressed to concerned. The transformation wasn't merely cosmetic, but structural, reaching into every aspect of the airline's operations. "Dr. Bennett," Janet Morris ventured, "while these changes are commendable, implementing them simultaneously across our entire operation seems ambitious." "It's necessary," Eleanor corrected firmly. "Partial implementation creates inconsistent experiences, undermining the very transformation we're attempting to achieve. We will roll out these changes as a comprehensive system, not as isolated initiatives." She opened her portfolio, the same one that had been splashed with cranberry juice the previous day, now cleaned and restored. "To facilitate implementation, I've established the Dignity First transition team effective immediately, led by external consultant Rafael Diaz, who specializes in service culture transformation." Rafael, a distinguished Hispanic consultant in his late 40s, stood as Eleanor introduced him. "Mr. Diaz has implemented similar protocols in healthcare and hospitality environments with measurable success. His team will provide the external perspective necessary for objective assessment and implementation. Additionally," Eleanor continued, "we're establishing what I'm calling the Zoe and Maya documentation protocol as our core operational standard. This system, inspired by my granddaughter's methodical documentation yesterday, establishes consistent record-keeping requirements for all customer interactions." She displayed slides showing a straightforward but comprehensive documentation template, essentially a professionalized version of what Zoe had created on her iPad during the flight. The system's elegance lay in its simplicity, objective recording of interactions with timestamps, direct quotes, and witness identification. "This doesn't seem revolutionary," observed Operations Director Michael Peterson skeptically. "That's precisely the point," Eleanor countered. "Effective systems rarely require complexity. They require consistent implementation. My 10-year-old granddaughters created this documentation approach in real time during a stressful situation. Our professional staff should certainly be capable of implementing it systematically." The subtle reprimand landed effectively, silencing further skepticism. Eleanor continued outlining specific implementation timelines, accountability metrics, and verification protocols that would ensure the transformation wasn't merely theoretical, but operational. By noon today, all frontline managers will receive digital training materials. By 5 p.m., every employee will have received communication regarding the new standards. By this time tomorrow, initial certification training will be available online. Full implementation across all customer touchpoints will be completed within 72 hours. The aggressive timeline drew murmurs of concern from several executives, but Eleanor's expression made clear that the schedule wasn't negotiable. What had begun as a PR crisis was being transformed into a catalyst for comprehensive operational change that Eleanor had clearly been planning long before yesterday's incident. "Now, regarding our emergency response to yesterday's situation," Eleanor transitioned smoothly. "Effective immediately, we're establishing a passenger dignity assurance fund with an initial allocation of $10 million. This will provide resources for addressing service failures, implementing rapid corrective actions, and compensating passengers who experience documented discrimination." She turned to Richard Blackwell, who had been unusually quiet throughout the meeting. "Mr. Blackwell, as CEO, you will be personally responsible for certifying monthly dignity compliance reports to the board. This responsibility cannot be delegated." Blackwell nodded, recognizing both the accountability being placed on him and the opportunity to demonstrate his alignment with Eleanor's vision. "I understand and fully support this responsibility." "Dr. Bennett." "Excellent," Eleanor acknowledged. "Because our press conference in 30 minutes will announce these changes to the world, positioning Aurora Airlines not as a company recovering from scandal, but as an industry leader establishing new standards for service dignity." She closed her portfolio with deliberate finality. What happened yesterday revealed problems that have likely existed within Aurora for years. Today's actions aren't just responding to a single incident, but addressing the cultural environment that made such an incident possible. As the executives gathered their materials and prepared for the press conference, Eleanor drew Janet Morris aside for a private word. "Janet, I'd like you to lead our Dignity First implementation team alongside Mr. Diaz. Your operational knowledge combined with his external perspective creates an ideal partnership for this transformation." Janet's expression registered surprise followed by determination. "I'm honored by your confidence. Dr. Bennett, may I ask why you selected me specifically?" "Because you were the only executive who expressed visible discomfort when Amanda Wilson's previous complaints were revealed," Eleanor explained candidly. "That suggests you value accountability, but lacked systems to implement it effectively. Now you'll have both the authority and the framework to create meaningful change." This personal observation, Eleanor's ability to notice individual reactions amid broader organizational dynamics, demonstrated precisely why her leadership was transformative. She wasn't merely implementing systems. She was identifying allies who shared her values and empowering them to drive change from within. As they moved toward the press conference where Aurora's transformation would be announced to the world, Eleanor maintained the same composed authority she had demonstrated throughout the previous day's challenges. The transformation wasn't reactive but strategic, not a response to embarrassment, but the implementation of a vision she had developed long before Amanda Wilson made the mistake of underestimating the elderly Black woman in first class. Amanda's aftermath. Amanda Wilson sat alone in her small apartment, staring blankly at her television as every major news network dissected her career-ending mistake. The surreal quality of the situation, becoming infamous overnight, terminated publicly, named explicitly in corporate press releases, had left her in a state of numb disbelief. Her phone had been buzzing constantly since yesterday afternoon, first with concerned colleagues, then with angry friends questioning her behavior, and finally with reporters seeking comment. She had stopped answering after the 20th call, retreating into stunned isolation as the full consequences of her actions became increasingly apparent. On screen, Aurora Airlines' press conference was being broadcast live. Dr. Eleanor Bennett stood at the podium, poised and authoritative, outlining the transformation initiative that had emerged from yesterday's incident. Beside her stood her granddaughters, the same children Amanda Bennett had treated with dismissive contempt, now positioned as architects of a protocol that would bear their names. The Zoe and Maya documentation protocol establishes objective standards for recording customer interactions. Eleanor explained to the assembled journalists. It creates accountability through evidence rather than subjective interpretation, ensuring consistent service regardless of passenger demographics. Amanda winced as cameras panned to the girls, their composed expressions revealing none of the distress she had attempted to cause them yesterday. They stood tall beside their grandmother, dignified beyond their years, embodying the very values Amanda had violated. "What about the employee involved in yesterday's incident?" a reporter called out. "Has she been terminated?" Eleanor's response was measured but unequivocal. Amanda Wilson's employment with Aurora Airlines has been terminated, effective immediately. However, this transformation isn't about a single employee, but about the systems that enabled discriminatory behavior to occur without appropriate accountability. The professional dignity of Eleanor's response somehow made it more devastating than any angry condemnation would have been. There was no vindictiveness, no personal satisfaction, just the calm implementation of necessary consequences. Amanda's phone buzzed again, another interview request, this time from a major morning show. The message mentioned sharing your side of the story, but Amanda knew there was no defense that could justify what the videos clearly showed. Her behavior had been indefensible, her prejudice undeniable. On her coffee table lay the formal termination notice that had arrived by courier that morning. The document was precise in its language, citing specific policy violations rather than emotional impacts. Even in firing her, Aurora Airlines was implementing Eleanor's evidence-based approach, documenting actions rather than passing judgment on character. Amanda picked up the remote and switched off the television, unable to bear any more coverage. The crushing weight of consequence settled over her as she finally confronted the reality of her situation at 34. Her airline career was over. Her professional reputation was irreparably damaged. Her financial security had evaporated overnight. Worst of all, she had no one to blame but herself. Her cousin Thomas couldn't protect her anymore. He had been placed on administrative leave pending review of his oversight failures. Her colleagues were distancing themselves, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. Her friends had seen the videos and were questioning everything they thought they knew about her. Amanda moved to her laptop, opening it with trembling fingers. Her social media accounts had exploded with messages, some expressing shock, others outrage, a few offering conditional support that felt more like pity than solidarity. Scrolling through the comments, she found hundreds of strangers analyzing her character, her motives, her worth as a human being based on 4 minutes of video that captured her at her absolute worst. A new email notification appeared, not from a reporter or angry viewer, but from a former colleague at another airline where Amanda had worked years earlier. The subject line read simply, "I remember." The message opened to reveal a painful truth. "I witnessed you do this before to other passengers. We all did." Nobody said anything because it was easier not to. What happened yesterday isn't surprising to anyone who worked with you. The only surprise is that someone finally had the power to hold you accountable. The words landed like physical blows, forcing Amanda to confront a reality she had been avoiding. Yesterday's incident wasn't an isolated mistake or momentary lapse in judgment. It was the natural culmination of behavioral patterns she had developed and reinforced over years, protected by systems that prioritized employee loyalty over passenger dignity. As this realization settled, Amanda's phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed her mother, the one person whose call she couldn't ignore. Taking a deep breath, she answered. "Amanda," her mother began without preamble, "I saw the videos. Everyone has. I raised you better than this." "Mom, Amanda started, but her mother continued. "Don't tell me it's not what it looks like. I watched you deliberately humiliate an elderly woman and her granddaughters. I heard what you said to her. That wasn't how I taught you to treat people." The disappointment in her mother's voice accomplished what public shaming couldn't. It pierced Amanda's defensive shell. allowing genuine remorse to surface for the first time. "I don't know what to do now," Amanda admitted, her voice breaking. "My career is over. Everyone hates me. I can never undo what happened." Her mother's response was gentle but firm. "No, you can't undo it, but you can learn from it. You can become better because of it. That's the only path forward." Amanda, not excuses, not self-pity, but honest reflection and genuine change. As the conversation continued, Amanda found herself confronting questions she had never seriously considered before. Why had she felt entitled to treat Eleanor and her granddaughters with such contempt? What assumptions had she made based solely on their appearance? How had she justified such behavior to herself for so long? After ending the call, Amanda sat in silence for several minutes, processing the full magnitude of the situation. Then, with a resolve born of necessity rather than virtue, she opened a new document on her laptop and began typing to Eleanor Bennett and her granddaughters. "No apology can undo the hurt I caused yesterday. My behavior was inexcusable. Reflecting prejudices I must now confront honestly. It wasn't much, just the beginning of accountability rather than its fulfillment." But as Amanda continued writing, acknowledging specific actions rather than making general apologies, she took the first tentative step toward understanding what Eleanor Bennett had demonstrated so powerfully, that true transformation began not with public statements, but with personal accountability. Whether that letter would ever be sent, whether Eleanor would ever read it, was secondary to the painful self-examination it represented. The beginning of Amanda's own transformation from the person who caused yesterday's incident to someone capable of learning from its consequences. The unexpected meeting 6 weeks after the incident that transformed Aurora Airlines. Eleanor sat in her executive office reviewing quarterly projections. The implementation of the Dignity First initiative was proceeding efficiently, with initial metrics showing promising improvements in both customer satisfaction and employee engagement. The media storm had gradually subsided, allowing the substantive work of transformation to continue without the spotlight's glare. A gentle knock interrupted her analysis. Her assistant, Michael, appeared at the door with an unusual expression, part uncertainty, part curiosity. "Dr. Bennett, I have a somewhat unexpected request," he began carefully. "Amanda Wilson has requested a meeting with you." Eleanor looked up from her reports, genuinely surprised for perhaps the first time since the incident. "Amanda Wilson, the former flight attendant?" "Yes, ma'am. She submitted a formal request through proper channels, including a written statement explaining her purpose. Our protocol would normally reject such a request, but given the significance of her case in our transformation initiative, I felt it should be brought directly to you." Eleanor extended her hand for the document Michael offered. Amanda's request was professionally formatted, her language respectful but direct. "I am requesting a brief meeting with Dr. Bennett to deliver a personal apology and to discuss potential contributions I might make to Aurora's transformation initiative based on my own ongoing education in unconscious bias and service equity. I understand if this request is denied and will respect whatever decision is made." Eleanor considered the request carefully. Meeting with Amanda wasn't necessary for Aurora's transformation, nor was it required for Eleanor's personal closure. Yet something in the phrasing, the acknowledgement of ongoing education rather than completed transformation, suggested genuine reflection rather than performative remorse. "Has she been in contact with any other Aurora personnel since her termination?" Eleanor inquired. "No, ma'am," Michael confirmed. "This is her first communication with the company. Our security team verified she hasn't attempted to contact any current employees or made public statements about the incident." Eleanor made her decision with characteristic decisiveness. "Schedule the meeting for tomorrow at 2:00 p.m., 30 minutes in the small conference room rather than my office. And Michael, please ask Zoe and Maya's governess to bring them here at that time as well." Michael's eyebrows rose slightly at this unexpected addition, but he nodded understanding. "Of course, Dr. Bennett. Should I inform Ms. Wilson that your granddaughters will be present?" "Yes, she should know exactly who will be attending and make her decision accordingly." Eleanor's tone made clear that this wasn't punitive but purposeful. If Amanda truly sought meaningful accountability, it necessarily included facing those she had harmed, not just their guardian. The following afternoon, Amanda Wilson arrived precisely 15 minutes before the scheduled meeting. She was dressed conservatively in a simple navy suit, her former confident demeanor replaced by quiet composure. Security escorted her to the small conference room, where she waited alone with her thoughts until exactly 2:00 p.m. When the door opened, Eleanor entered first, followed by Zoe and Maya. The girls had been thoroughly prepared for this meeting, understanding its purpose and their choice in participation. They took seats flanking their grandmother, their expressions neither hostile nor particularly welcoming, simply attentive. "Ms. Wilson," Eleanor began formally, "thank you for coming. I understand you requested this meeting to deliver a personal apology and discuss potential contributions to our transformation initiative." Amanda nodded, visibly nervous but determined. "Yes, Dr. Bennett. First, I want to thank you for agreeing to meet with me. I know you have no obligation to do so." She took a deep breath, then turned her attention to include the girls in her address. "What I did on that flight was inexcusable. I deliberately humiliated you, made racist assumptions about your belonging, and abused my position to make you feel unwelcome. There is no justification for my behavior." Amanda continued with surprising specificity, addressing exact moments from the incident, the initial juice spill, her derogatory comments, the pattern of differential service that followed. Her apology wasn't general but precise, acknowledging specific actions rather than vague regret. "Since that day," she continued, "I've been forced to confront aspects of myself I never wanted to acknowledge. I've spent these weeks in intensive diversity education, unconscious bias training, and personal therapy to understand why I behaved as I did and how to ensure I never treat another person that way again." She placed a folder on the table, not sliding it forward presumptuously, simply positioning it within reach if desired. "I've documented my educational journey, including certification in several programs focused on service equity and bias recognition. Not because I expect reinstatement. I understand my position with Aurora is permanently terminated, but because genuine accountability requires demonstrable change, not just expressed remorse." Eleanor listened without interruption, her expression neutral but attentive. When Amanda finished speaking, Eleanor turned to her granddaughters. "Zoe, Maya, do either of you have questions for Ms. Wilson?" Zoe, the more reserved twin, spoke first. "Why did you think we didn't belong in first class? We've flown there lots of times." The directness of the child's question seemed to catch Amanda slightly off guard, but she answered honestly. "I made assumptions based on how I expected first-class passengers to look. Those assumptions were racist and completely wrong. I never considered your experiences or your grandmother's accomplishments. I just saw your skin color and decided you didn't belong." Maya, characteristically more forthright, asked the question adults might have considered too direct. "Did you hate us because we're black?" Amanda's composure faltered momentarily at the child's bluntness. "I didn't hate you," she replied carefully, "but I did treat you differently because you're black, and that's just as wrong. I believed things about you without knowing anything about you, and I used my position to make you feel unwelcome. That's what racism often looks like. Not always hate, but assumptions and different treatment based on skin color." Eleanor observed this exchange with quiet approval. Amanda wasn't offering excuses or minimizing her behavior, but acknowledging it directly, even to children. "Ms. Wilson, Eleanor finally spoke. "You mentioned potential contributions to our transformation initiative. What specifically did you have in mind?" Amanda straightened slightly, clearly prepared for this question. "During my bias education programs, I realized my experience could serve as a case study in how prejudice manifests in customer service environments, not as justification but as illustration of patterns that require intervention." She gestured to the folder. "I've outlined a potential training module where my documented behavior, combined with my subsequent education, might help other service professionals recognize and address similar patterns before they escalate to the point mine did." The proposal was thoughtful rather than self-serving, not positioning Amanda as a redemption story, but as a cautionary example who had gained insight through consequence. Eleanor considered this carefully before responding. "Your termination remains appropriate and final. However, your experience indeed offers educational value for our transformation initiative." She made a decision that balanced accountability with opportunity. "Our training division will review your proposal. If deemed valuable, you may be contracted as an external case study presenter. not as an employee, but as an educational resource sharing lessons learned through personal experience. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, nor was it rejection. It was the same evidence-based strategic approach Eleanor applied to all aspects of Aurora's transformation. If Amanda's experience could contribute to preventing similar incidents, utilizing that experience represented sound business judgment rather than personal reconciliation. "Thank you, Dr. Bennett," Amanda replied, understanding the measured nature of this opportunity. "That's more consideration than I had any right to expect." "One final question," Eleanor said, her tone shifting slightly. "What have you learned from this experience that you believe would be most valuable for our employees to understand?" Amanda considered this carefully before answering. "That discrimination isn't always about conscious hatred. Sometimes it's about unconscious assumptions so deeply ingrained we don't even question them. I never thought of myself as racist until I was forced to watch videos of my own behavior and confront the undeniable evidence." She glanced at Zoe and Maya, her expression genuinely remorseful. "And I've learned that accountability isn't punishment. It's the necessary first step toward becoming better than we were. The consequences I've faced weren't about revenge, but about justice. Understanding that difference has been the most important part of my education." As the meeting concluded, Eleanor stood to signal its end. "We appreciate your apology and will give your proposal appropriate consideration. Security will escort you from the building." Amanda nodded, accepting these terms without protest. As she prepared to leave, Zoe spoke unexpectedly. "Ms. Wilson," Amanda turned, uncertain. "Yes. Grandma always says that documentation is about improvement, not just punishment," the child said seriously. "I hope your documentation helps you improve too." It was perhaps the most profound moment of the entire meeting, a child applying her grandmother's wisdom to offer not forgiveness, but perspective to the woman who had attempted to humiliate her family. In that simple statement, Zoe demonstrated that she had internalized not just Eleanor's documentation practices, but the philosophical purpose behind them: transformation rather than retribution. As Amanda departed, Eleanor embraced her granddaughters with quiet pride. They had witnessed not just accountability in action, but the principle that guided all of Eleanor's leadership. That true power lay not in punishing those who caused harm, but in transforming systems to prevent future harm while creating pathways for individual growth. Whether Amanda would ultimately contribute to Aurora's training program remained to be determined by objective evaluation rather than emotional response. Exactly the evidence-based approach that defined the airline's new operational philosophy. Corporate culture revolution. 3 months after the incident that catalyzed Aurora Airlines' transformation, the evidence of fundamental change was becoming measurable across all operational metrics. The boardroom that had once hosted Eleanor's acquisition announcement now displayed comprehensive data visualizations tracking implementation progress against established benchmarks. "The results are exceeding our most optimistic projections," reported Chief People Officer Dr. Gabriela Hernandez, recently recruited from a leading hospitality group known for excellence in service culture. Customer satisfaction metrics have increased 23% overall, with particularly significant improvements among passengers of color, whose ratings have risen 37% since implementation began. The executive team, now including several new members selected specifically for their alignment with Eleanor's transformation vision, reviewed the data with genuine engagement rather than obligatory attention. What had begun as a crisis response had evolved into a comprehensive revolution in how Aurora conducted every aspect of its business. The Zoe and Maya documentation protocol has been particularly effective, Aldash Hernandez continued, highlighting a section of her presentation. By establishing consistent recording requirements for all passenger interactions, we've created both accountability and learning opportunities for our frontline staff. The protocol, inspired by the twins' methodical documentation during the original incident, had been refined into an elegant operational system. Flight attendants now carried small digital devices that facilitated real-time documentation of service interactions, not as surveillance, but as professional development tools that helped identify both excellence and opportunities for improvement. Most significantly, Dr. Hernandez noted, complaint patterns have fundamentally shifted. Before implementation, complaints from passengers of color were 58% less likely to receive substantive responses. That disparity has been completely eliminated under our new investigation protocols. Eleanor nodded approval, though her expression conveyed expectation rather than surprise. These improvements weren't unexpected but anticipated, the natural result of systematic implementation of evidence-based practices. And our employment metrics, she inquired, turning to the next section of the report. Equally promising, confirmed Rafael Diaz, the external consultant who had guided implementation of the Dignity First initiative. Employee engagement scores have increased 29% since implementation began, with particular improvement among frontline staff who report feeling empowered by clear standards rather than constrained by subjective expectations. The transformation hadn't been universally embraced initially. Several long-serving managers had resigned rather than adapt to the new accountability standards. Others had required intensive coaching to unlearn established practices that privileged employee convenience over passenger dignity. But as implementation progressed and results became evident, resistance had gradually transformed into engagement, particularly as compensation structures evolved to reward consistent application of the new standards. Perhaps most telling, Rafael continued, is the dramatic increase in internal reporting of potential service inequities. Before implementation, as Aurora averaged 2.3 internal reports monthly, we're now seeing 4753 reports monthly, with 89% including proactive intervention before passenger complaints occur. This represented perhaps the most significant cultural shift, employees identifying and addressing potential problems before they escalated, creating a self-correcting system that improved continuously through internal vigilance rather than external pressure. The witness intervention protocol has been particularly effective, noted Janet Morris, who had embraced her leadership role in the transformation. By establishing clear guidelines for how colleagues should respond when observing potential discrimination, we've created collective accountability rather than individual responsibility. Eleanor's expression showed particular satisfaction at this development. That's precisely the systemic change we sought to achieve, moving beyond individual behavior to create organizational culture that makes discrimination actively difficult rather than passively discouraged. The meeting continued with detailed analysis of specific improvements across departments, from check-in procedures to in-flight service protocols to complaint resolution systems. Each aspect of Aurora's operation had been systematically evaluated and transformed through the same evidence-based approach that Eleanor had applied throughout her career. One final note before we conclude, said Richard Blackwell, who had adapted admirably to the new expectations for his CEO role. The industry impact of our transformation has been substantial. 3 competing airlines have announced similar initiatives within the past month, clearly responding to both our improved metrics and the positive media attention our changes have generated. This too had been part of Eleanor's strategic vision, not merely transforming Aurora but establishing new standards that would influence the entire industry. By demonstrating that dignity-focused service delivery improved both customer satisfaction and financial performance, she had created a business case for transformation that competitors couldn't ignore. And the Accountability Partnership Program, Eleanor inquired, referencing a particularly innovative aspect of the initiative. Exceeding expectations, Rafael confirmed. We've established formal partnerships with 8 community organizations representing diverse passenger populations. Their quarterly assessments provide external validation of our progress while identifying opportunities for continued improvement. This external accountability mechanism ensured Aurora's transformation wouldn't lose momentum once media attention faded, a common failure point for corporate change initiatives. By institutionalizing outside perspective, Eleanor had protected the transformation from the complacency that often eroded progress over time. As the meeting concluded, Eleanor turned to Janet with a significant question. And the training module developed from Ms. Wilson's proposal, has that been implemented as planned? Janet nodded confirmation. Yes, after extensive review and refinement, the case study has been incorporated into our core training program, with anonymized presentation to protect privacy while preserving educational value. Amanda Wilson's contribution had indeed proven valuable when objectively evaluated, not as a redemption narrative, but as a documented example of how unchecked bias manifested in service environments. Her experience now served as a powerful teaching tool, transformed from personal failure to systemic improvement opportunity. Excellent, Eleanor approved. Ensure the educational focus remains on patterns rather than personalities. The value lies in the analysis, not the individual. This, perhaps, represented the most profound aspect of Aurora's transformation, the shift from personalized blame to systematic improvement, from punitive reaction to educational prevention. Individual accountability remained essential, but it served as the beginning of transformation rather than its conclusion, as the executives departed to continue implementation across their respective departments. Eleanor remained briefly in the boardroom, reviewing the data visualizations with quiet satisfaction. The transformation was proceeding exactly as she had envisioned when developing her acquisition strategy, not as a response to a single incident, but as the systematic implementation of values she had cultivated throughout her career. The cranberry juice that had stained her blouse 3 months earlier had long since faded from public memory, replaced by consistent evidence of meaningful change. That was precisely the difference between reaction and transformation, between momentary outrage and lasting improvement. And watching it all unfold were Zoe and Maya, absorbing lessons in strategic leadership that would shape their own approaches to challenge and opportunity for decades to come. Industry-wide impact. The transformation of Aurora Airlines had begun as an internal initiative focused on specific operational improvements. By the 6-month mark, it had evolved into an industry-wide movement that was reshaping service standards across commercial aviation. Eleanor reviewed the latest industry analysis on her tablet as her private car navigated through morning traffic toward Aurora headquarters. The Wall Street Journal headline captured the significance succinctly. Bennett effect spreads across aviation as competitors race to adopt dignity-focused protocols. The article detailed how Aurora's demonstrable improvements, a 23% increase in customer satisfaction, a 37% reduction in service complaints, and a 12% growth in market share, had created competitive pressure that other airlines couldn't ignore. What began as reputation management had transformed into strategic necessity as passengers increasingly factored service equity into their booking decisions. 4 major carriers have now implemented versions of the Zoe and Maya protocol, the article noted, establishing consistent documentation requirements for passenger interactions regardless of seating class or demographic factors. Eleanor smiled slightly at this development. The protocol named after her granddaughters had transcended Aurora to become an industry standard, precisely the outcome she had envisioned when structuring the transformation initiative as open source rather than proprietary. By sharing methodologies and metrics freely with industry partners, she had accelerated adoption while positioning Aurora as the thought leader in service equity. Her driver pulled up to Aurora headquarters, where the transformation's physical manifestations were immediately apparent. The lobby that had once displayed standard corporate messaging now featured the dignity-first philosophy prominently, with digital displays showing real-time customer satisfaction metrics sorted by demographic categories. This transparency, making service equity publicly measurable, represented perhaps the most significant departure from industry norms. "Good morning, Dr. Bennett," greeted Michael as she entered her office suite. "The National Transportation Equity Board representatives have arrived for their consultation session. They're in conference room A with Mr. Diaz and Dr. Hernandez." Eleanor nodded acknowledgement. This meeting represented another aspect of the industry-wide impact. Governmental agencies now looking to Aurora's transformation as a model for potential regulatory standards. Rather than resisting such oversight, Eleanor had proactively engaged with regulatory bodies, positioning Aurora to influence policy development rather than merely respond to it. "And we've received another implementation inquiry," Michael added, this time from Pacific International Airlines. That makes 17 carriers formally requesting consultation on implementing our protocols. The spread of Aurora's methodologies had created an unexpected revenue stream as competitors sought guidance on implementation. Eleanor had established a dedicated consulting division to manage these requests, with proceeds funding scholarship programs for underrepresented students entering aviation careers, transforming industry interest into educational opportunity. As Eleanor prepared for the regulatory meeting, her phone chimed with a message from Janet. Zoe and Maya protocol now being adapted for implementation in hotel industry. Marriott CEO requesting meeting next week to discuss licensing arrangements. This cross-industry adoption represented perhaps the most significant impact of Aurora's transformation. What began as a response to an incident in commercial aviation had evolved into a broadly applicable methodology for ensuring service equity across hospitality environments, from airlines to hotels to cruise lines to restaurant chains. The meeting with the National Transportation Equity Board proceeded productively, with Aurora's implementation team sharing detailed metrics demonstrating the business case for service equity standards. The regulators were particularly impressed by the financial performance data, evidence that dignity-focused service delivery improved not just customer satisfaction, but bottom-line results. What's most compelling about Aurora's approach, noted board chairwoman Elizabeth Robinson, is that it positions equity as a performance driver rather than a compliance requirement. You've demonstrated that treating all passengers with consistent dignity actually improves operational efficiency. This perspective, that service equity represented sound business strategy rather than merely ethical obligation, had been crucial to the transformation's rapid adoption across the industry. By demonstrating clear financial benefits alongside moral imperatives, Aurora had created a compelling case that competitors couldn't dismiss as merely reputation management. Following the regulatory meeting, Eleanor proceeded to her next appointment, a strategy session with the leadership team developing Aurora's newest initiative, the Bennett Institute for Service Excellence. This independent research and training organization, funded by Aurora but governed by an external board, would further institutionalize the transformation methodologies while conducting ongoing research to refine and expand their application. The Institute's first research cohort has been selected, reported Education Director Marcus Williams. 30 graduate students from diverse backgrounds will begin the fellowship program next month, focusing on developing next-generation protocols for service equity across transportation environments. Eleanor reviewed the selected fellows with approval. The program had attracted applications from top universities nationwide, with candidates recognizing the professional value of specialized training in the methodologies that were reshaping service industries. What had begun as Aurora's internal transformation had evolved into an academic discipline with career pathways for emerging professionals. And the executive education program, Eleanor inquired, referencing another aspect of the Institute's mission, fully subscribed through the next 3 quarters. Marcus confirmed, "We've had to add additional sessions to accommodate demand from senior leadership teams across multiple industries." This program, providing intensive training for C-suite executives in transformation methodologies, represented perhaps the most significant aspect of the industry-wide impact. By educating leadership teams rather than just frontline staff, the Institute ensured that service equity would be embedded in strategic decision-making rather than merely operational execution. As the day progressed through additional meetings and implementation reviews, Eleanor maintained her characteristic focus on evidence-based assessment rather than self-congratulation. The transformation's success was measured not in media attention or industry recognition, but in consistent improvement across objective metrics, from complaint resolution timelines to service consistency measurements to demographic satisfaction parity. Late in the afternoon, Eleanor received a particularly meaningful update from Raphael, Amanda Wilson's training module receiving highest effectiveness ratings in new hire orientation. 93% of participants report fundamental perspective shift following case study presentation. This represented a particularly satisfying aspect of the transformation, the conversion of a painful incident into an effective educational tool. Amanda's documented behavior, combined with her subsequent reflection and education, provided a powerful learning experience that resonated with new employees more effectively than theoretical discussion could achieve. By day's end, Eleanor's final meeting brought perhaps the most significant evidence of industry-wide impact. The CEOs of 3 competing airlines had requested a joint consultation on establishing shared service standards, an unprecedented collaboration among traditional competitors. "We've recognized that service equity represents a collective challenge rather than a competitive differentiator," explained West Air CEO Jonathan Roberts. "While we'll continue competing on routes, prices, and amenities, we believe passengers deserve consistent dignity regardless of which carrier they choose." This evolution from competition to collaboration represented the ultimate vindication of Eleanor's approach, the recognition that dignity transcended market positioning to become an industry-wide value proposition. By establishing open-source protocols rather than proprietary methodologies, she had created the foundation for collective improvement rather than isolated excellence. As Eleanor guided the discussion toward practical implementation steps, she reflected on the extraordinary journey from that morning in first class with cranberry juice soaking her blouse to this moment of industry transformation, What had begun as a single incident of discrimination had catalyzed changes that would benefit millions of passengers across multiple carriers for years to come. That was the difference between reaction and transformation, between addressing a single incident and reshaping an entire industry. The cranberry juice had long since faded from memory, but the principles of dignity, documentation, and systematic improvement continued spreading with ever-increasing impact. And watching it all unfold were Zoe and Maya, absorbing lessons in strategic leadership that would shape not just their future business approaches, but their understanding of how meaningful change actually occurred, not through emotional reaction, but through methodical transformation of systems and standards. Part 5, The Legacy. Precisely 6 months after the incident that had catalyzed Aurora's transformation, Eleanor found herself once again preparing to board a flight to San Francisco. The symmetry was deliberate. She had specifically scheduled this journey to mark the half-year anniversary of what company lore now called the Catalyst Moment. This time, however, everything was different. The trio approached the gate accompanied by Janet Morris, now serving as Chief Transformation Officer alongside her operational responsibilities. Eleanor had positioned the twins between herself and Janet, a subtle but deliberate arrangement ensuring the girls would witness the transformation through fresh eyes. "Good morning, Dr. Bennett." The gate agent greeted them with genuine warmth rather than the perfunctory acknowledgement Eleanor had received 6 months earlier. "And good morning, Zoe and Maya. We're honored to have you aboard today." The agent's recognition of the girls by name wasn't mere courtesy, but reflected their now legendary status within Aurora. The Zoe and Maya protocol had transformed from internal methodology to industry-wide standard, with their names becoming synonymous with service equity throughout commercial aviation. "Thank you, James," Eleanor replied, noting the agent's name badge with the same attentiveness she brought to all interactions. "We're looking forward to experiencing the transformation firsthand." As they proceeded down the jetway, Janet quietly highlighted implementation details that might otherwise go unnoticed. "Every customer-facing employee has completed comprehensive dignity certification," she explained. "Documentation systems now capture every interaction, creating both accountability and continuous improvement opportunities." The first-class cabin looked superficially similar to the one where Amanda Wilson had deliberately humiliated Eleanor 6 months earlier. But beneath the aesthetic consistency lay fundamental operational changes invisible to casual observation, but transformative in their impact. "Welcome aboard, Dr. Bennett and family," greeted their flight attendant with a warm smile. The name badge identified her as Lisa Patel, and her manner conveyed genuine professionalism rather than performative courtesy. "We're so pleased to have you with us today." Lisa knelt slightly to address the twins directly, a small but significant gesture acknowledging them as valued passengers rather than mere accompaniments to their grandmother. "Zoe and Maya, it's particularly special to serve you today. Your protocol has changed everything about how we approach our work." The girls exchanged pleased glances, still slightly uncomfortable with their unexpected fame, but increasingly confident in public situations. "Thank you, Miss Patel," Zoe replied politely. "We're excited to see the changes." As they settled into the same seats they had occupied 6 months earlier, 2A, 2B, and 2C, Eleanor noted the subtle improvements implemented throughout the cabin. The magazines now featured diverse executives on their covers rather than exclusively white business leaders. The amenity kits contained products suitable for various hair and skin types rather than products designed primarily for white passengers. Even the safety demonstration video had been reimagined to feature crew members and passengers of diverse backgrounds, ages, and abilities. "Before we depart, I'd like to offer you our signature beverage service," Lisa announced, approaching with a silver tray bearing crystal glasses. "We have a selection of juices, including cranberry if you prefer." The reference wasn't lost on Eleanor or the twins. The same beverage that had been weaponized against her dignity 6 months earlier was now being offered with impeccable service. The symbolism was powerful without being heavy-handed, a demonstration of transformation rather than merely improved performance. "Cranberry juice would be perfect," Eleanor replied with a knowing smile. "For all 3 of us." Lisa served their beverages with meticulous attention to detail, placing linen coasters first, then the glasses, with precise, respectful movements. Not a drop spilled as she completed the service with professional excellence. "Is there anything else I can provide before takeoff?" she inquired, Her question directed equally to Eleanor and the twins rather than assuming the adults' preferences should take priority. No, thank you. Maya responded with the confidence of someone accustomed to being treated as a valued customer rather than an afterthought. This is perfect. As Lisa moved to serve other passengers, Eleanor observed her interactions carefully. The consistency was remarkable. The same attentive service, the same respectful engagement, the same professional courtesy extended to each passenger regardless of age, appearance, or apparent status. This wasn't performance for the benefit of the airline's owner, but the systematic implementation of standards that had become operational norms. "Grandma," Zoe whispered as the plane began its taxi toward the runway, "everything feels completely different." Eleanor nodded, taking a sip of her cranberry juice, served perfectly chilled in a crystal glass with no risk of staining her ivory silk blouse. That's the difference between cosmetic change and systematic transformation. Sweetheart, one alters appearances, the other rebuilds foundations. As the aircraft lifted into clear skies, Janet discreetly provided additional context about Lisa's background. She's one of the 250 scholarship recipients from our first Zoe and Maya Aviation Scholarship cohort, she explained quietly. Completed accelerated training 4 weeks ago and specifically requested assignment to this route. The information added meaningful dimension to their flight attendants' exceptional service. Lisa wasn't merely performing her professional role, but embodying the transformative opportunity Eleanor's response to that initial incident had created. From scholarship recipient to frontline representative of Aurora's new service philosophy, she personified the positive legacy emerging from what could have remained merely a negative experience. Midway through the flight, Lisa approached with a small leather-bound book. "Dr. Bennett, I hope you don't mind, but our crew prepared something to mark the 6-month anniversary of the transformation." She presented the volume reverently. Inside, Eleanor found handwritten notes from every crew member aboard the flight, each expressing how the Dignity First initiative had transformed not just their professional practice, but their personal perspective on the service equity. "The documentation protocol gave me confidence to address situations I previously ignored," wrote one flight attendant. "For the first time in my career, I feel empowered rather than constrained by service standards," note another. "My children now understand what I do as a profession of dignity rather than merely customer service," shared a third. The notes continued for several pages, each reflecting a dimension of transformation that transcended operational metrics to impact individual lives and perspectives. This, perhaps, represented the most meaningful legacy of Eleanor's strategic response. Not just improved service delivery, but fundamentally altered understanding of service dignity. "This is incredibly thoughtful," Eleanor acknowledged, genuinely moved by the personal reflections. "Please share my appreciation with your colleagues." "There's one more thing," Lisa added, her expression suggesting particular significance. "Captain Martinez would like a word when your schedule permits. She has a personal connection to the transformation that she'd like to share." Eleanor's curiosity was piqued, though she maintained her characteristic composure. "Of course. Please let her know I'd be happy to visit the flight deck at her convenience." When the seatbelt sign extinguished, Lisa escorted Eleanor forward to the cockpit, where Captain Rebecca Martinez greeted her with profound respect. "Dr. Bennett, thank you for taking time to visit," she began once the cockpit door closed for privacy. "I wanted to share something that might not be in your briefing materials about today's flight." The captain gestured to the co-pilot beside her, a young Hispanic woman whose nameplate read, First Officer Rodriguez. "Maria is Amanda Wilson's cousin," Rebecca explained quietly. "She was initially rejected from our pilot training program 3 years ago, despite excellent qualifications. Under our new merit-based evaluation protocols, her application was reconsidered and approved based solely on objective assessment criteria." The significance wasn't lost on Eleanor. In the same family where one cousin had abused authority to protect another's discriminatory behavior, a third cousin had now benefited from the very transformation that accountability had precipitated. The symmetry was both powerful and poignant, evidence that systematic change created opportunity alongside accountability. "I'm honored to meet you. First Officer Rodriguez," Eleanor acknowledged with genuine warmth. "Your presence in this cockpit represents exactly the outcome we sought to achieve. Merit-based opportunity regardless of connection or background." Maria nodded with evident emotion. "When Amanda's incident happened, our entire family was devastated. not just by her behavior, which was indefensible, but by the recognition of how systemic protection had enabled that behavior for years. Your response, focusing on transformation rather than merely punishment, created a pathway for others in our family to demonstrate that we don't share those values. This perspective, the ripple effects of transformation extending beyond direct participants to impact family systems and community networks, represented a dimension of change that operational metrics couldn't capture, but that fundamentally altered the human landscape of the organization. As Eleanor returned to her seat, she shared this discovery with the twins in age-appropriate terms, helping them understand that transformation created opportunity alongside accountability. This wasn't merely about consequences for past behavior, but about creating systems where future behavior could express the best rather than the worst of human potential. The remainder of the flight unfolded with the same exceptional service, not as performance for the owner's benefit, but as systematic implementation of standards that had become operational norms. When they landed in San Francisco, Lisa escorted them to the terminal with the same professional courtesy she would extend to any valued passengers, the only distinction being her genuine appreciation for the transformation their experience had catalyzed. "Thank you for flying with us today," she said as they prepared to depart. "And thank you for transforming what it means to serve with dignity." As they walked through the terminal where Eleanor had first received notification of Amanda's termination 6 months earlier, Janet provided a final observation that captured the essence of the transformation's legacy. "What strikes me most," she reflected, "is how quickly exceptional has become normal. 6 months ago, the service you received today would have been remarkable. Now it's simply our standard, not because we're performing for your benefit, but because dignity has become non-negotiable throughout our operation." That perhaps represented the most profound legacy of Eleanor's strategic response, not just improved service metrics or industry recognition, but the normalization of dignity as an operational standard rather than an aspirational goal. The transformation had redefined not just what Aurora did, but what it was, an organization where consistent excellence had replaced inconsistent privilege as the defining characteristic of the passenger experience. And witnessing it all were Zoe and Maya, absorbing another masterclass in strategic transformation, understanding that meaningful change wasn't measured in punitive consequences, but in systematic improvement that created opportunity alongside accountability. The scholarship program. 1 month after their commemorative flight, Eleanor stood at a podium in Aurora's newly established training center, addressing the inaugural class of the Zoe and Maya Aviation Scholarship Program. Before her sat 250 students from diverse backgrounds, each selected through a rigorous merit-based application process that evaluated potential rather than privilege. "Welcome to what I hope will be the most transformative opportunity of your professional development," Eleanor began, her voice carrying natural authority throughout the auditorium. "You represent not just the future of Aurora Airlines, but the future of an industry undergoing fundamental reimagination." The scholarship program had been conceptualized as part of Aurora's transformation initiative, but had evolved into something far more significant than initially envisioned. What began as a modest proposal to increase diversity in aviation career pathways had expanded into a comprehensive development program that attracted applications from thousands of candidates nationwide. Each of you was selected based on demonstrated potential rather than established credentials. Eleanor continued, "That distinction is crucial to understanding our philosophy. We're investing in who you can become rather than certifying who you already are." The program's structure reflected this philosophy, combining academic preparation with practical experience and leadership development, unlike traditional industry training programs that focus narrowly on technical skills. The Zoe and Maya scholarship approach integrated service philosophy, ethical decision-making, and cultural competence alongside operational proficiency. "Your curriculum has been designed to develop not just aviation professionals, but transformation leaders," Eleanor explained. "You'll learn not only how to perform within existing systems, but how to reimagine and reshape those systems when necessary." From the front row, Zoe and Maya watched with evident pride as their grandmother outlined the program bearing their names. At 11 years old, they had become unwitting symbols of a transformation movement that extended far beyond their initial documentation of Amanda Wilson's behavior. "Before we proceed with orientation," Eleanor continued, "I'd like to introduce someone whose perspective may provide valuable context for your journey. From the side of the stage emerged a familiar figure. Amanda Wilson, no longer in an Aurora uniform but dressed in professional business attire. Her presence created a momentary ripple of surprise through the audience, many of whom recognized her from the viral videos that had catalyzed Aurora's transformation. "Some of you may recognize Ms. Wilson," Eleanor acknowledged directly. "Her interaction with my family 6 months ago became the catalyst for changes that ultimately created this scholarship program. She's here today not as an employee of Aurora Airlines. That relationship appropriately ended following the incident, but as an educational resource sharing valuable perspective on both discrimination and accountability." Amanda stepped forward with visible humility, her demeanor reflecting neither defensive self-justification nor performative remorse, but the measured composure of someone who had engaged in genuine reflection. "Thank you, Dr. Bennett, for this opportunity," she began, addressing both Eleanor and the scholarship recipients. "My role today isn't to seek forgiveness or rehabilitation, but to provide context that might be valuable as you begin your aviation careers." With remarkable candor, Amanda described the mindset and systemic enablers that had allowed her discriminatory behavior to develop and persist throughout her career: the absence of accountability, the normalization of differential treatment, the protection provided by connections rather than performance. "What you witnessed in those viral videos," she explained, "wasn't an isolated incident of poor judgment, but the culmination of behavioral patterns developed and reinforced over years. Patterns that went unchallenged because our systems prioritized employee protection over passenger dignity." Her analysis wasn't self-excusing, but systemically contextualizing, helping the scholarship recipients understand that discrimination rarely manifested as isolated incidents, but as expressions of cultural norms that required systematic transformation rather than merely individual correction. "The most valuable lesson from my experience," Amanda continued, "isn't about what I did wrong, but about what Aurora is now doing right. The transformation initiated following my termination has created systems where behavior like mine becomes immediately visible through documentation, immediately addressable through intervention protocols, and systematically discouraged through accountability structures. This perspective, the recognition that transformation required system changes rather than merely individual consequences, represented a crucial dimension of the educational philosophy underlying the scholarship program. These future aviation professionals weren't just learning operational procedures, but understanding the systemic context that shaped individual behavior. "I'll be working with several of your cohorts during specific training modules," Amanda concluded, "not as a role model, but as a case study in how unchecked bias manifests in service environments. My hope is that my experience, however regrettable, might contribute to your development as professionals committed to dignity as a non-negotiable standard." As Amanda departed the stage, Eleanor returned to the podium to contextualize her contribution. "True transformation," she explained, "requires both accountability and opportunity. Consequences for behavior that violates standards alongside pathways for those affected by those violations to access better systems." She gestured to the diverse faces of the scholarship recipients. "Each of you represents that opportunity dimension, the possibility of building aviation careers based on merit rather than connection, on performance rather than privilege, on dignity rather than discrimination." The orientation continued with practical details about curriculum, expectations, and resources. Throughout the day, Eleanor observed with quiet satisfaction as the scholarship recipients engaged with program facilitators, asked insightful questions, and began forming the professional relationships that would support their development. Later that afternoon, she met privately with the program's academic director, Dr. James Washington, to review initial implementation metrics and address emerging needs. The conversation quickly moved beyond operational details to philosophical foundations. "What strikes me most about this cohort," Dr. Washington observed, "is how quickly they've connected the scholarship opportunity to broader transformation principles. They understand they are not just receiving financial support for aviation careers, but participating in an industry-wide reimagining of service standards." Eleanor nodded agreement. "That's precisely the perspective we hope to cultivate. Technical proficiency without philosophical foundation creates skilled operators but not transformation leaders." The scholarship program's dual focus, developing both operational excellence and transformational leadership, represented a particularly meaningful legacy of Aurora's transformation journey. These future aviation professionals would enter the industry not merely as competent practitioners, but as catalysts for continued evolution of service standards. One particularly interesting development, Dr. Von Washington noted, reviewing his implementation data, has been the response to Amanda Wilson's educational contribution. Initial surveys indicate 93% of participants found her perspective essential to understanding systematic enablers of discrimination, rather than merely cautionary. This outcome validated Eleanor's controversial decision to include Amanda's experience as an educational resource rather than merely a cautionary tale. By positioning her termination as the beginning of transformation, rather than merely the conclusion of accountability, Eleanor had created learning opportunities that transcended punitive narratives. In the mentorship pairings, Eleanor inquired, referencing another innovative aspect of the program's structure, proceeding effectively. And Washington confirmed. Each scholarship recipient has been matched with both an industry professional and an executive team member, creating multi-level development relationships that connect operational experience with strategic perspective. This mentorship dimension represented perhaps the most significant departure from traditional aviation training programs. By connecting scholarship recipients directly with Aurora's leadership team, Eleanor had created pathways for diverse perspectives to influence strategic decision-making rather than merely operational execution. As evening approached, Eleanor invited Zoe and Maya to join her for a tour of the training facilities that now bore their names. The twins had matured visibly in the 6 months since the incident, their perspectives shaped by witnessing both discrimination and transformation firsthand. "What do you think about all these people studying in a program with our names?" Eleanor asked as they observed simulator training in progress. "It's weird but cool," Maya replied with characteristic directness. "They're learning because of something bad that happened to us, but they're turning it into something good. Like you did with the airline," Zoe added thoughtfully. "You didn't just get mad about the juice, you changed how everything works." This perspective, the recognition that transformation required converting negative experiences into positive systems, represented perhaps the most valuable legacy Eleanor could provide her granddaughters. They were learning not merely to navigate challenging circumstances, but to transform those challenges into opportunities for systematic improvement. As they prepared to depart, a young scholarship recipient approached somewhat hesitantly. "Excuse me, Dr. Bennett and Zoe and Maya, I just wanted to say thank you. Before this program, I didn't think someone like me could have an aviation career. Now, I'm not just training to be a flight attendant, I'm preparing to help transform an entire industry." This simple expression of appreciation captured the essence of the scholarship program's impact, not merely providing individual opportunity, but creating collective transformation potential. These 250 students represented not just Aurora's future workforce, but the industry's future leadership, bringing diverse perspectives to challenges that had historically been addressed through homogeneous viewpoints. As Eleanor and the twins departed the training center, they passed a wall displaying the program's guiding principle in elegant script. True transformation requires converting documentation of what went wrong into implementation of what can be right. This philosophy, the systematic application of evidence-based improvement rather than merely punitive consequence, represented perhaps the most meaningful legacy of Aurora's transformation journey. What began as cranberry juice staining an expensive blouse had evolved into educational opportunity, transforming hundreds of lives and, through them, an entire industry's approach to service dignity. Amanda's redemption arc. 1 year after the incident that transformed Aurora Airlines, Amanda Wilson stood before a classroom of flight attendant trainees at a competing carrier, delivering a presentation titled, "From Discrimination to Dignity Lessons from Systematic Failure." Her audience consisted of 30 new hires preparing for their first assignments as aviation professionals, careers that would unfold in an industry fundamentally different from the one Amanda had entered a decade earlier. "The most dangerous aspect of discrimination," Amanda explained with the clarity of hard-earned insight, "isn't that it happens, but that it becomes normalized through systemic protection. My behavior wasn't an isolated incident of poor judgment, but the predictable outcome of accountability structures that prioritized employee convenience over passenger dignity." Her presentation wasn't self-exonerating, but systematically analytical, helping these new professionals understand that discriminatory behavior rarely emerged spontaneously, but developed within cultural contexts that either encouraged or discouraged particular actions. By examining her own documented behavior with clinical precision, Amanda had developed an educational approach that transcended both self-flagellation and defensive justification. The transformation that followed my termination, she continued, advancing her presentation to display Aurora's implementation metrics, demonstrates that service equity isn't merely a moral imperative but a performance driver. When Aurora implemented the Zoe and Maya protocol, customer satisfaction increased 27%, while operational efficiency improved 18%. These statistics, the measurable business benefits of dignity-focused service delivery, represented a crucial dimension of Amanda's educational approach. Rather than framing service equity as merely ethical obligation, she positioned it as strategic advantage, creating professional motivation that extended beyond moral consideration to include career advancement. Following her formal presentation, Amanda engaged with the trainees in candid discussion about the personal and professional consequences of her actions. Her approach wasn't performatively remorseful, but pragmatically instructive, helping these new professionals understand the real-world implications of service decisions that might seem inconsequential in isolation but prove devastating in aggregate. The cranberry juice I spilled deliberately cost me my aviation career, she acknowledged without self-pity. But more importantly, it revealed systematic failures that had allowed similar incidents to occur without appropriate accountability for years. My termination represented necessary individual consequence, but Aurora's transformation represented essential systemic improvement. This perspective, the recognition that her accountability had catalyzed transformation larger than herself, represented a crucial dimension of Amanda's redemption journey. She had progressed beyond personalizing the incident to understanding its significance within broader industry patterns that required systematic rather than merely individual change. After the training session concluded, Amanda met privately with the airline's vice president of customer experience, who had observed her presentation with evident interest. Their conversation quickly moved beyond operational specifics to philosophical foundations. "What strikes me most about your approach," the executive noted, "is how effectively you've converted personal failure into educational opportunity. You're not seeking rehabilitation of your reputation, but transformation of industry practices." Amanda nodded agreement. That perspective evolved gradually through my education following termination. Initially, I focused exclusively on personal consequences: my lost career, public humiliation, professional ostracism. Dr. Bennett's decision to consider my experience as potentially educational, rather than merely cautionary, created a pathway toward contribution that transcended self-interest. This evolution, from defensive self-protection to constructive industry contribution, represented the core of Amanda's redemption journey. She had progressed beyond seeking personal forgiveness to facilitating professional transformation, converting her documented mistakes into educational resources that might prevent similar incidents throughout the industry. "We'd like to engage you for a more comprehensive training series," the executive proposed. "Not just with new hires, but with our existing staff, particularly those in leadership positions who establish cultural norms rather than merely following them." The invitation represented significant professional validation, recognition that Amanda's perspective offered value beyond cautionary example to include systematic insight. By focusing on transformational potential rather than personal rehabilitation, she had created professional opportunity that transcended her individual circumstances. Later that evening, Amanda returned to the modest apartment that had replaced her flight attendant accommodations following termination. Her life had changed dramatically in the years since the incident. Her career trajectory altered, her financial circumstances constrained, her professional identity fundamentally redefined. Yet the transformation extended beyond external circumstances to include internal perspective, particularly regarding her understanding of accountability and opportunity. On her desk sat a leather-bound journal, her documentation practice adapted from the very protocol call that had catalyzed her termination. Each day, she recorded interactions, observations, and reflections with the same methodical precision that Zoe and Maya had demonstrated on that fateful flight. This wasn't performative penance, but practical implementation of principles she now recognized as professionally valuable rather than merely punitive. Amanda opened the journal to that day's entry, adding reflections from the training session she had facilitated. Her writing revealed neither defensive self-justification nor excessive self-criticism, but the balanced perspective of someone engaged in genuine professional development rather than reputation management. Today's session revealed the power of systematic analysis over personal narrative. When I present my behavior as individual failure, trainees focus on avoiding similar mistakes. When I present it as systematic outcome, they focus on transforming conditions that enable such behavior. The distinction is crucial. One prevents individual incidents, the other transforms organizational culture. This insight, the recognition that meaningful change required systematic rather than merely individual focus, represented perhaps the most significant dimension of Amanda's redemption journey. She had progressed beyond addressing personal consequences to facilitating collective transformation, contributing to industry evolution that would benefit millions of passengers she would never meet. As she completed her reflection, Amanda's phone chimed with a notification, an email from Dr. Eleanor Bennett responding to her quarterly progress report. These communications weren't personal reconciliation, but professional accountability, maintaining appropriate boundaries while acknowledging developmental progress. Ms. Wilson, your training evaluations continue demonstrating exceptional educational impact, particularly regarding systematic context for discriminatory behavior. The distinction you've drawn between individual responsibility and systemic enablers provides valuable perspective for aviation professionals at all organizational levels. The Transformation Institute would welcome your participation in our upcoming industry symposium, specifically addressing how accountability can catalyze improvement rather than merely punishing failure. Please contact Dr. Washington if you're available to contribute. E. Bennett, the message wasn't warmly personal, but professionally respectful, acknowledging Amanda's educational contribution without minimizing the accountability that had preceded it. This balance represented Eleanor's consistent approach throughout Amanda's redemption journey, maintaining appropriate consequence while creating conditional opportunity based on demonstrated development. Amanda composed a carefully worded response, accepting the invitation while maintaining the professional boundaries that appropriately defined her relationship with Aurora. Her communication reflected neither presumptuous familiarity nor excessive deference, but the measured respect of someone who recognized both the legitimacy of her accountability and the conditional nature of her subsequent opportunity. As she prepared for sleep, Amanda reflected on the extraordinary journey from that morning in first class to her current role as industry educator. The transformation hadn't erased accountability for her actions. Her aviation career remained appropriately terminated, her professional reputation permanently altered, her financial circumstances significantly constrained. Yet within those consequences, she had discovered unexpected opportunity to contribute meaningfully to industry transformation that transcended her individual circumstances. That perhaps represented the most profound dimension of her redemption journey, the recognition that accountability and opportunity could coexist when properly balanced. Eleanor Bennett had created that balance through her strategic response to the incident, establishing appropriate consequences while creating conditional pathways for Amanda's experience to contribute to systematic improvement. The cranberry juice that had ended Amanda's aviation career had simultaneously catalyzed her evolution from service provider to service educator, a transformation that represented neither complete redemption nor permanent condemnation, but the complex reality of accountability with opportunity, consequence with contribution, individual responsibility with systematic improvement. The Granddaughters' growth on the one-year anniversary of the incident that had transformed Aurora Airlines, Eleanor gathered with Zoe and Maya in her home study for what had become a cherished tradition, their quarterly leadership legacy conversation. These discussions had evolved into structured opportunities for intergenerational wisdom transmission, with Eleanor sharing strategic insights, while the twins contributed increasingly sophisticated observations from their unique perspective. Before we begin, Eleanor announced with characteristic ceremonial formality, "I have something special for each of you." From her desk, she withdrew 2 packages wrapped in silver paper embossed with Aurora's wingspan logo. The girls accepted them with barely contained excitement. Their grandmother's gifts were invariably both meaningful and meticulously selected. "Open them together," Eleanor instructed, watching with quiet pleasure as they carefully removed the wrapping to reveal identical leather portfolios, smaller versions of her own legendary business tool, but crafted with the same Italian leather and monogrammed with their respective initials. "Your own documentation portfolios," Eleanor explained as the twins examined their gifts with evident appreciation. Customized for your individual styles but sharing the core purpose. Systematic recording of observations that might otherwise be dismissed or forgotten. The portfolios weren't merely symbolic but functional, designed with specific features tailored to each girl's documentation approach. Zoe's included pre-formatted pages reflecting her preference for structured recording, while Maya's featured blank sheets accommodating her more freeform analytical style. Both contained integrated digital components that complemented their physical documentation while maintaining the tangible connection to evidence that Eleanor had always emphasized. These represent more than record-keeping tools, Eleanor continued, her tone conveying the gift's significance beyond its material value. They symbolize your evolution from witnesses of transformation to architects of change. The twins exchanged glances of shared understanding, their communication system that had developed alongside their individual personalities. At 12 years old, they had matured visibly since that morning in first class. Their perspectives shaped not just by witnessing discrimination but by observing systematic transformation in response. "Thank you, Grandma," Zoe said, running her fingers appreciatively over the embossed leather. "It feels like graduation." "It is, in an important sense," Eleanor confirmed. "You've progressed from implementing documentation practices I taught you to developing your own approaches to evidence-based leadership. These portfolios acknowledge that evolution. Over the past year, the twins had indeed developed distinctive leadership styles that complemented their natural tendencies. Zoe, inherently methodical, had cultivated systematic observation skills that identified patterns others overlooked. Maya, naturally analytical, had developed incisive questioning approaches that revealed underlying assumptions behind visible behaviors. Together, they created a powerful partnership that combined structured documentation with probing insight. Now Eleanor continued, transitioning to the substantive portion of their conversation. "Let's discuss what you've observed over the past quarter about Aurora's ongoing transformation." This wasn't merely grandmotherly indulgence, but strategic development. Eleanor genuinely valued their unique perspective as observers who moved between passenger experience and corporate oversight. The twins had developed remarkable insights by witnessing Aurora's transformation from this dual vantage point, identifying connections and opportunities that sometimes escaped even experienced executives. "I've been tracking consistency metrics across different flight crews," Zoe began, opening a digital notebook where she had recorded observations from their recent travels. "The dignity-first protocols are being implemented more uniformly than 3 months ago, but I'm noticing interesting variations between international and domestic routes." Her analysis continued with sophisticated observation of implementation patterns, how certain aspects of the protocols translated seamlessly across cultural contexts, while others required thoughtful adaptation. At 12 years old, Zoe was developing analytical skills that many business school students would envy, applying her natural methodical tendencies to strategic observation. "The documentation system is working really well," Maya added, contributing her complementary perspective. "But I think we're missing emotional data that could be really valuable. The forms capture what happened, but not how passengers felt about it, which seems important for service improvement." This insight, the recognition that objective documentation could be enhanced through systematic recording of subjective experience, represented precisely the kind of thoughtful observation Eleanor had hoped to cultivate in her granddaughters. They weren't merely implementing practices she had taught them, but evolving those practices through their own intellectual contributions. "That's an excellent observation," Eleanor acknowledged with genuine respect rather than condescending praise. "How would you recommend capturing that emotional dimension without sacrificing the objectivity that makes our documentation valuable?" The discussion continued for nearly 2 hours, moving from specific observations about Aurora's transformation to broader principles of strategic leadership. Throughout, Eleanor engaged with the twins not as children receiving instruction, but as developing leaders contributing valuable perspective, modeling the same respect for their insights that she expected them to demonstrate toward others, regardless of age or position. As their conversation concluded, Eleanor transitioned to a new dimension of their development journey. "Your school has invited me to speak at next month's Career Day," she informed them. "I've proposed an alternative approach, that you two present on documentation as leadership, while I observe from the audience." The twins exchanged surprised glances, simultaneously honored and intimidated by the opportunity. Public speaking to their peers and teachers represented a significant evolution of their visibility beyond the corporate environments where they had become increasingly comfortable. "You believe we're ready for that?" Zoe asked, her methodical nature immediately assessing preparedness. "Absolutely, Peter," Eleanor confirmed without hesitation. "You've demonstrated sophisticated understanding of documentation principles and their application to real-world challenges. More importantly, your peers might connect more readily with these concepts when presented by fellow students rather than an adult business leader." The proposal reflected Eleanor's strategic approach to their development, creating opportunities that stretched their capabilities while providing support structures that ensured success. She wasn't protecting them from challenges, but preparing them to navigate those challenges effectively, building confidence through accomplishment rather than praise. "We could use our experience with Ms. Wilson as a case study," Maya suggested, her mind immediately developing content approaches, not focusing on her behavior, but on how documentation created accountability. "And we could demonstrate how our documentation protocol has evolved into an industry standard," Zoe added, their complementary thinking patterns immediately evident. "It's not just about what happened on the plane, but what changed because of it." Eleanor observed their collaborative planning with quiet satisfaction. They were applying sophisticated analytical frameworks to develop educational content, demonstrating intellectual maturity beyond their chronological age without sacrificing the authenticity of their youthful perspective. "I believe that approach would be extremely effective," she approved. "Focus on the transformation rather than the incident, the systematic change rather than the individual behavior. That's the essence of strategic leadership, converting challenges into improvement opportunities through methodical documentation and thoughtful implementation." As the twins departed to begin preparing their presentation, Eleanor remained in her study reflecting on their extraordinary development over the past year. They had evolved from children shocked by public discrimination to young leaders in analyzing systematic transformation, a journey accelerated by witnessing both institutional failure and strategic response firsthand. Their growth represented perhaps the most meaningful legacy of Aurora's transformation, not just improved service metrics or industry recognition, but the development of next-generation leadership perspective that would continue advancing dignity-focused practices long after Eleanor's direct influence had concluded. By witnessing discrimination addressed through strategic transformation, rather than merely emotional reaction, they had internalized principles that would shape their approach to challenge throughout their lives. Later that evening, Eleanor received an email from Zoe containing a detailed outline for their presentation, accompanied by Maya's analytical framework for converting their experience into educational content. The materials demonstrated sophisticated understanding of both documentation principles and pedagogical approaches, reflecting intellectual development far beyond typical 12-year-old capacity. As Eleanor reviewed their work, adding minor suggestions rather than substantive revisions, she recognized that her granddaughters had progressed beyond implementing principles she had taught them to evolving those principles through their own intellectual contributions. They weren't merely following her leadership approach, but developing their own distinctive styles that would eventually surpass her methodology through generational innovation. That perhaps represented the most profound dimension of their growth journey, the evolution from recipients of wisdom to contributors of insight, from witnesses of transformation to architects of change, from observers of strategic leadership to practitioners of evidence-based improvement. The leather portfolios Eleanor had given them symbolized not just documentation tools, but the responsibility that accompanied their developing capabilities, the opportunity to convert observation into action, evidence into improvement, challenge into transformation. The cranberry juice that had stained Eleanor's blouse a year earlier had catalyzed not just Aurora's corporate transformation, but the accelerated development of two extraordinary young women whose leadership potential had been activated through witnessing strategic response to institutional failure. Their growth represented the most enduring legacy of that momentary humiliation, the conversion of negative experience into positive development through the strategic application of documentation, accountability, and systematic improvement. Final media appearance, 18 months after the incident that had transformed Aurora Airlines. Eleanor sat with Zoe and Maya in the green room of national mourning, preparing for their first major television appearance as a family. The interview request had come as Aurora's transformation initiative received the prestigious Global Excellence in Service Award, recognizing not just improved metrics, but industry-wide impact that had elevated standards across commercial aviation. Remember our discussion about strategic messaging? Eleanor reminded the twins as a production assistant adjusted their microphones. This interview isn't about revisiting the incident, but highlighting the transformation it catalyzed. Focus on systematic improvement rather than individual accountability. The girls nodded understanding, having prepared extensively for this public platform. At 12 and a half, they projected remarkable poise, their natural composure enhanced by the confidence that comes from thorough preparation. Each carried her leather portfolio containing talking points, supporting statistics, and strategic messaging frameworks either developed through collaborative planning sessions. 3 minutes to air, announced the floor director, signaling their imminent transition to the studio set where host Rebecca Lawrence waited to conduct what the producers had promoted as an exclusive conversation with the family that transformed an airline industry. As they moved to the set, Eleanor maintained her characteristic calm, the same composure that had served her so effectively when cranberry juice soaked her blouse 18 months earlier. The twins followed her example, settling into their chairs with quiet confidence rather than nervous energy. We're delighted to welcome Dr. Eleanor Bennett and her granddaughters, Zoe and Maya Bennett. Rebecca began once cameras were rolling. 18 months ago, an incident of discrimination aboard an Aurora Airlines flight became a viral sensation. Today, we're discussing how that moment catalyzed transformation that has reshaped service standards throughout commercial aviation. The introduction struck precisely the balance Eleanor had requested during pre-interview discussions, acknowledging the incident without sensationalizing it, focusing on transformation rather than victimization, positioning the family as catalysts for improvement rather than recipients of mistreatment. Dr. Bennett, your response to that incident has been described as a masterclass in strategic leadership. Rebecca continued, rather than seeking merely personal vindication, you implemented systematic changes that have demonstrably improved service for millions of passengers. What guided that approach? Eleanor responded with the measured precision that had characterized her leadership throughout the transformation journey. The incident revealed systematic failures rather than merely individual behavior. Addressing Ms. Wilson's actions was necessary but insufficient. True transformation required reimagining the structures that had enabled such behavior to develop and persist. She continued with specific examples of implementation metrics that demonstrated the business case for dignity-focused service delivery, customer satisfaction improvements, complaint reduction percentages, operational efficiency gains. The statistics weren't merely impressive, but compelling, establishing transformation as strategic advantage rather than merely ethical obligation. And the results have been remarkable, Rebecca acknowledged, displaying graphics that visualized Aurora's performance improvements. Customer complaints down 78%, employee satisfaction up 43%, market share increased 12%. These metrics suggest transformation isn't just morally appropriate, but financially beneficial. Precisely, Poisson, Eleanor confirmed. Dignity-focuses service delivery represents sound business strategy rather than merely ethical compliance. When we establish systematic accountability through the Zoe and Maya documentation protocol, we created operational consistency that improves both passenger experience and business performance. The host turned her attention to the twins, adjusting her approach to engage them as contributors rather than merely symbols. Zoe and Maya, the documentation protocol that now bears your names has been implemented by 17 airlines worldwide. How does it feel to have created an industry standard at 12 years old? The question could have invited self-congratulation, but the twins had been well prepared to maintain strategic focus. Zoe responded first, her natural methodical approach evident in her structured response. The protocol wasn't created for recognition, but for effectiveness, she explained with remarkable clarity for her age. Documentation creates accountability by establishing objective evidence rather than subjective interpretation. When everyone knows interactions are being systematically recorded, behavior naturally aligns with established standards. Maya added her complementary perspective, her analytical tendencies evident in her insightful observation. What's most important isn't that it has our names, but that it's being implemented consistently. The transformation happens when documentation becomes routine rather than exceptional, when recording interactions is standard practice rather than special response to problems. Their poised articulation of sophisticated concepts visibly impressed the host, who adjusted her questioning to engage with their unexpected depth rather than treating them as children with rehearsed responses. You've both demonstrated remarkable maturity throughout this journey, Rebecca noted. What have you learned from watching your grandmother transform a negative experience into positive systematic change? The twins exchanged their characteristic glance of shared understanding before Zoe responded. We've learned that strategic response requires documentation before action. Grandma didn't react emotionally to what happened. She recorded evidence systematically, then used that evidence to create meaningful change. And we've learned that transformation isn't about punishing people who made mistakes, but improving systems, so those mistakes don't keep happening. Maya added, their complementary thinking patterns evident even in spontaneous responses. Ms. Wilson's behavior was wrong, but focusing only on her actions would have missed the opportunity to transform the entire airline. This sophisticated understanding, distinguishing between individual accountability and systematic improvement, revealed intellectual maturity far beyond their chronological age. They had internalized not just documentation techniques, but transformation philosophy, developing perspective that would shape their approach to challenge throughout their lives. The interview continued with discussion of Aurora's industry-wide impact, particularly the adoption of dignity-focused service standards by competing carriers. Eleanor provided specific examples of implementation across transportation sectors, from airlines to cruise lines to railway operations, demonstrating how Aurora's transformation had catalyzed broader industry evolution. The statistics tell a compelling story, Rebecca noted, displaying additional metrics on screen, across 17 airlines implementing the Zoe and Maya protocol. Customer satisfaction has increased an average of 23%, while operational costs have decreased 7%. That combination of improved experience with enhanced efficiency represents the holy grail of service delivery. The correlation isn't coincidental, Eleanor confirmed. When service delivery becomes consistent rather than variable, both customer experience and operational execution naturally improve. Documentation creates that consistency by establishing objective standards that transcend individual interpretation. As the interview concluded, Rebecca addressed a final question to Eleanor that moved beyond operational specifics to philosophical foundations. Dr. Bennett, beyond the impressive metrics and industry recognition, what do you consider the most meaningful legacy of Aurora's transformation? Eleanor's response revealed the perspective that had guided her approach throughout the journey, the recognition that transformation transcended individual experience to create collective improvement. The most meaningful legacy isn't improved service metrics or industry recognition, but the demonstration that dignity-focused leadership creates value that extends beyond moral satisfaction to include operational excellence. She gestured toward her granddaughters with evident pride. These extraordinary young women witnessed both institutional failure and strategic response firsthand. They've learned that transformation begins with documentation, progresses through accountability, and culminates in systematic improvement that benefits individuals they'll never meet. That perspective, converting challenges into improvement opportunities through methodical documentation and thoughtful implementation, represents the most meaningful legacy of our journey together. As the segment concluded and they departed the studio, Eleanor received notification that Aurora's stock price had increased 3% following the interview. Further validation that dignity-focused leadership created tangible value beyond reputation management. The transformation that began with cranberry juice staining her blouse had evolved into industry-wide movement that continued generating both ethical and financial returns 18 months later. But watching her granddaughters discuss the interview during their car ride back to the hotel, Eleanor recognized that their development represented the most meaningful outcome of that transformative journey. They had evolved from children shocked by public discrimination to young leaders articulating transformation principles with sophisticated understanding, an accelerated developmental trajectory catalyzed by witnessing strategic response to institutional failure. You both performed exceptionally well, Eleanor acknowledged as their driver navigated through morning traffic. Your responses demonstrated not just preparation, but genuine understanding of transformation principles. The twins accepted this assessment with characteristic balance, neither dismissing the praise nor excessively celebrating it. Their perspective had matured alongside their intellectual development, creating poised young leaders who understood both the value of recognition and its appropriate contextualization. The interview questions were better than I expected, Maya observed analytically. I thought they'd focus more on what happened on the plane instead of the transformation afterward. That's because Grandma established clear parameters during pre-interview discussions, Zoe noted, her methodical thinking immediately identifying the strategic preparation that had preceded their public appearance. Documentation before action, just like she taught us. Eleanor smiled at this observation, evidence that they had internalized not just specific techniques, but fundamental principles that would serve them throughout their lives. The transformation that began with cranberry juice staining her blouse had catalyzed not just Aurora's corporate evolution, but the accelerated development of two extraordinary young women whose leadership potential had been activated through witnessing strategic response to institutional failure. That, perhaps, represented the most profound legacy of their journey together. The conversion of momentary humiliation into lasting empowerment through the strategic application of documentation, accountability, and systematic improvement. The cranberry juice had long since faded from public memory, replaced by implementation metrics and industry recognition. But its lasting impact continued through the developing leadership perspective of two young women who had learned that transformation began not with emotional reaction, but with strategic documentation. 2 years after Amanda Wilson spilled cranberry juice on Eleanor Bennett's cream silk blouse, the transformation that incident had catalyzed continued expanding beyond its original boundaries. On a clear spring morning, Eleanor stood at the observation deck of Aurora's headquarters, watching aircraft bearing the company's redesigned livery, now featuring the Dignity First tagline prominently displayed on each fuselage, departing for destinations worldwide. Beside her stood Zoe and Maya, now 13 years old and increasingly engaged in the ongoing evolution of the transformation initiative. They had matured visibly in the 2 years since that fateful flight, developing from shocked witnesses of discrimination into articulate advocates for systematic improvement. Their leather portfolios, constant companions since Eleanor had presented them on the 1-year anniversary, contained sophisticated documentation of their observations and analyses, evidence of intellectual development accelerated by witnessing strategic transformation firsthand. 23 airlines now implementing the protocol, Maya noted, reviewing statistics on her tablet, and expanding beyond aviation into hotel chains, cruise lines, and railway operations. The methodology transfers effectively because it addresses fundamental human dynamics rather than industry-specific challenges, Eleanor explained, continuing their ongoing education in strategic thinking. Documentation creates accountability regardless of operational context or service environment. From the adjacent conference room emerged Amanda Wilson, now completing her 2nd year as an educational consultant for Aurora's Transformation Institute. Her role remained carefully defined, not an employee but a contracted resource providing valuable perspective on how discriminatory behavior developed within enabling systems. Her redemption journey hadn't erased accountability for her actions, but had created conditional opportunity to contribute meaningfully to transformation that transcended her individual circumstances. Dr. Bennett, she acknowledged with appropriate professional respect. The international implementation team requested additional case studies for next week's Singapore training. I've prepared materials for your review. Eleanor accepted the documentation with measured appreciation. Their relationship remained professionally bounded rather than personally reconciled. Appropriate consequence balanced with conditional opportunity based on demonstrated development. Amanda had evolved from terminated employee to valuable educational resource by focusing on systematic insight rather than personal rehabilitation, converting her documented mistakes into teaching tools that help prevent similar incidents throughout the industry. Thank you, Ms. Wilson. We'll review these before Thursday's planning session, Eleanor replied, maintaining the professional formality that appropriately defined their ongoing connection. As Amanda departed, Eleanor turned her attention back to her granddaughters, whose extraordinary development represented perhaps the most meaningful legacy of Aurora's transformation. They had progressed beyond implementing principles she had taught them to evolving those principles through their own intellectual contributions, developing distinctive leadership styles that complemented their natural tendencies while sharing core values of evidence-based improvement. The scholarship program welcomed its 3rd cohort yesterday, Eleanor informed them, referencing the educational initiative that bore their names. 750 students now participating across 3 annual cycles, with the first cohort nearing graduation. This program, providing comprehensive aviation career pathways for students from diverse backgrounds, represented institutional embodiment of transformation principles that extended beyond operational practices to include industry composition. By creating educational opportunity alongside accountability structures, Aurora had transformed not just how service was delivered, but who delivered that service, diversifying an industry historically characterized by homogeneous perspective. Lisa Patel has been promoted to lead purser, Zoe noted, referencing the flight attendant who had served them on their commemorative flight 18 months earlier. She's implementing a mentorship program for new scholarship graduates transitioning into operational roles. This ongoing evolution, transformation, catalyzing additional transformation through leadership development, represented precisely the sustainable improvement model Eleanor had envisioned when structuring Aurora's initiative as a systematic rather than merely reactive. By creating both accountability structures and development pathways, she had established self-reinforcing improvement cycles that continued generating positive outcomes long after the initial catalyst had faded from public attention. As they departed the observation deck, Eleanor guided her granddaughters toward Aurora's corporate museum, where exhibits chronicled the airline's transformation journey from its catalyzing incident through its industry-wide impact. The centerpiece display featured a preserved cream silk blouse with distinctive cranberry stains, Eleanor's original garment from that fateful flight, now transformed from evidence of humiliation into symbol of strategic response. Some visitors find it strange that we feature this so prominently, Eleanor explained as they viewed the display. They expect us to minimize the incident rather than highlight it, but transformation requires acknowledging catalysts rather than concealing them, recognizing that meaningful change often begins with challenging moments that reveal improvement opportunities. This perspective, converting negative experiences into positive systems through strategic documentation and methodical implementation, represented the philosophical foundation Eleanor had cultivated throughout her career and was now transmitting to her granddaughters. They were learning not merely to navigate challenging circumstances, but to transform those challenges into opportunities for systematic improvement that benefited individuals they would never meet. As they continued through the museum, they encountered an interactive display featuring Amanda Wilson delivering her educational presentation on systematic enablers of discriminatory behavior. Her contribution wasn't presented as redemption narrative, but as valuable perspective on institutional factors that required transformation rather than merely individual correction. Ms. Wilson's journey demonstrates an important principle, Eleanor observed as they watched the presentation. Accountability without opportunity creates punishment rather than transformation. Opportunity without accountability creates entitlement rather than improvement. Balancing both creates development pathways that convert negative experiences into positive contributions. This balanced approach, maintaining appropriate consequences while creating conditional opportunities based on demonstrated development, characterized Eleanor's leadership throughout Aurora's transformation journey. She had established accountability structures that addressed specific behaviors while implementing improvement systems that transcended individual circumstances, creating organizational culture that made discrimination actively difficult rather than merely discouraged. Their museum tour concluded at an exhibit featuring the Zoe and Maya documentation protocol, now implemented by 23 airlines worldwide and expanding into adjacent service industries. The display included interactive demonstrations of how systematic recording created accountability through objective evidence rather than subjective interpretation, converting variable service delivery into consistent experience regardless of passenger demographics or employee preferences. Your legacy extends far beyond your names on a protocol, Eleanor told her granddaughters as they prepared to depart. You've demonstrated that transformation begins with documentation, progresses through accountability, and culminates in systematic improvement that benefits individuals you'll never meet. That perspective, converting challenges into opportunities through methodical documentation and thoughtful implementation, represents the true legacy of our journey together. As they exited the museum into Aurora's main terminal, they passed Lisa Patel briefing her flight crew on dignity-focused service delivery. Her professional excellence reflected not just individual competence, but systematic transformation of organizational culture, evidence that meaningful change had occurred not just in operational metrics, but in fundamental approach to service dignity. The cranberry juice that had stained Eleanor's blouse 2 years earlier had long since faded from public memory, replaced by implementation metrics and industry recognition. But its catalyzing impact continued through both operational systems and leadership development, particularly in the accelerated maturation of two extraordinary young women whose perspective had been shaped by witnessing strategic response to institutional failure. That perhaps represented the most profound legacy of Aurora's transformation journey, not just improved service metrics or industry recognition, but the development of next-generation leadership perspective that would continue advancing dignity-focused practices long after Eleanor's direct influence had concluded. By witnessing discrimination addressed through strategic transformation rather than merely emotional reaction, Zoe and Maya had internalized principles that would shape their approach to challenge throughout their lives. As their car departed Aurora headquarters that evening, Eleanor engaged her granddaughters in reflective conversation about the continued evolution of the Transformation Initiative. These discussions had become cherished traditions, opportunities for intergenerational wisdom transmission that combined Eleanor's strategic insight with the twins' increasingly sophisticated observations. "What strikes me most after 2 years," Eleanor observed, "isn't the operational metrics or industry recognition, but how quickly extraordinary has become ordinary. Dignity-focused service delivery has transformed from aspirational vision to operational standard, not because we're performing for recognition, but because systems have made consistency natural rather than exceptional." This perspective, the normalization of excellence through systematic implementation rather than individual effort, represented perhaps the most significant achievement of Aurora's transformation journey. By establishing documentation protocols, accountability structures, and development pathways, Eleanor had created organizational culture where dignity became operational standard rather than aspirational goal. "The most powerful phrase I've heard from passengers," Zoe contributed thoughtfully, "isn't praise for exceptional service, but casual comment about consistency. Aurora is always like this means transformation has become standard rather than special. That's because systems create patterns," Maya added with characteristic analytical insight. "Individual behavior varies, but systematic protocols create consistency. Documentation doesn't just identify problems, it prevents problems by establishing clear expectations. Their sophisticated understanding, distinguishing between individual performance and systematic outcome, revealed intellectual maturity far beyond their chronological age. They had internalized not just documentation techniques, but transformation philosophy, developing perspective that would shape their approach to challenge throughout their lives. "Remember our family motto," Eleanor reminded them as their car approached home. "Success they never saw coming." That phrase isn't about surprise vindication, but strategic preparation, creating transformation through methodical documentation and thoughtful implementation rather than emotional reaction or public confrontation. The twins nodded understanding, having witnessed this philosophy demonstrated throughout Aurora's transformation journey. They had learned that meaningful change required converting negative experiences into positive systems through strategic documentation and methodical implementation, a perspective that would serve them in challenges far beyond the specific circumstances that had catalyzed their accelerated development. "The most valuable lesson from our journey together," Eleanor concluded as they arrived home, "isn't about documentation techniques or accountability structures, but about transformation philosophy. True power isn't demonstrated through emotional reactions to injustice, but through strategic responses that convert momentary challenges into lasting improvement. This wisdom, the recognition that transformation began with documentation, progressed through accountability, and culminated in systematic improvement, represented the enduring legacy Eleanor hoped to transmit to her granddaughters. They were learning not merely to navigate challenging circumstances, but to transform those challenges into opportunities for systematic improvement that benefited individuals they would never meet." As they entered their home, Eleanor watched with quiet pride as the twins automatically documented their observations from the day in their leather portfolios, not because she had instructed them to do so, but because systematic recording had become natural practice rather than conscious effort. Their development represented perhaps the most meaningful outcome of Aurora's transformation journey, the evolution of next-generation leadership perspective that would continue advancing dignity-focused practices long after the specific incident that had catalyzed their accelerated maturation had faded from memory. The cranberry juice that had stained Eleanor's blouse had transformed not just Aurora Airlines, but the developing leadership perspective of two extraordinary young women who had learned that meaningful change began not with emotional reaction, but with strategic documentation. Their future contributions would represent the most enduring legacy of that momentary humiliation, the conversion of negative experience into positive development through the strategic application of documentation, accountability, and systematic improvement. YouTube outro. Thank you for joining us for this incredible journey of transformation and strategic leadership. The story of Dr. Eleanor Bennett and her granddaughters shows us that true power isn't about emotional reactions to injustice, but strategic responses that create lasting change. If this story resonated with you, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss our weekly stories of resilience, transformation, and dignity in action. Your engagement helps us continue sharing these powerful narratives with a wider audience. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you witnessed or experienced a situation where documentation helped create accountability? How have you transformed challenges into opportunities for improvement in your own life? Your stories and insights contribute to our growing community dedicated to dignity and strategic thinking. Remember, sometimes the most powerful response to injustice isn't immediate reaction, but methodical documentation and thoughtful implementation. As Dr. Bennett demonstrated, the best revenge truly is success they never saw coming. Success built through evidence, preparation, and perfect timing. Join us next week for another powerful story of transformation in action. Until then, remember that true change begins not with confrontation, but with documentation. Not with emotion, but with evidence. Not with reaction, but with strategic response. This is Black and Resilient Stories, where real experiences create real transformation. We'll see you next time.